Hi, everybody. We've got a quorum, so thank you to everybody. Let's see, today is October 30th, and this is the Expanded Community Advisory Panel meeting, so thank you for everybody for coming. We have a slight problem with the microphone at the podium, is that it's not working, and so Chantal, where's that mic that you talked about? Oh, okay. So on the podium, there is a microphone that is on, so just, there's a hot mic, so if you're standing over there, just keep that in mind. It's a handheld microphone. Sorry, you can't see it from where it is. Thank you, Philip. Okay, so I think we'll start off with oral communications. Do we have members of the public who'd like to speak to an item that is not on the agenda? If so, raise your hand and you can line up at the podium. Got one. Anybody else? Oh, sorry. Yes, Chantal is reminding me we should call the roll, so I'm going to let her call the roll first while he gets to the mic. Thanks.
Thank you. Gregory Braille. Barbara Best. Just raise your hand. Phil Burton. Tony Carrasco. In Young Cho. Yes. Megan Kane. Larry Klein. Here. Judy Kleinberg. Here. Pat Lau. Here. Adina Levin.
She's outside. She's just here.
Alrighty. Present-ish. Yeah. Nadia Nayak.
Here.
Keith Reckdahl. Here. David Shin. Here. Carrie Templeton.
Carrie's running a few minutes late, but she will be here.
Okay, you do have a quorum.
Great, thank you. Okay, now oral communications. Go ahead, you get 2 minutes.
Okay. Gary Lindgren. Let's see, I've got a couple of thoughts for you. One thing is important is that a special email address be set up for and, you know, I'm afraid if you send messages to transportation or Chantel, things are going to get lost. Also, on the summary evaluation sheet for Churchill and closure column, row A, change the color to red, as there will be a huge impact if that's closed. And for the viaducts column, row I, change the color to dark brown and not red, as the viaduct is only 5 feet higher, but not a wall. And also regarding the summary evaluation sheet, I can now see that some of these items listed are really going to have two views. You know, it all depends on, you know, who the person's looking at, what their thoughts are on the impacted resident. For instance, on the viaduct row I, some people see elevated rails, while others will see a clear view under the viaduct. Another area, closing Churchill, rows A, will mean minimal cost, but also create traffic issues and problems for emergency vehicles.
Thank you. I believe Chantal is working on getting us an email. Did you want to give an update?
We're working on it.
We're working on it. Thank you. We hear you.
4 to 6.
Okay. Okay, Barbara, you have a public comment as well?
I do. I'm not sure if this is on the agenda, but with respect to this matrix, and with respect to the Churchill closure, it says with closure of Churchill, the traffic at nearby intersections will be impacted, but this can be mitigated. And Chantel knows, as the consultants responded at the last meeting, that the traffic mitigation and the data that we've been promised is on the website, which I have yet to see, so I don't believe it exists. And I would like, in your process, when you're talking to the community, for you all to be able to explain what mitigation means. Is it full, is it partial, or is it pie in the sky? Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so we're going to move on to item number 3, which is informational. So we have a community workshop presentation that will, who's presenting it?
We are down here. Is the TVs need to get turned on themselves? Or
Are you plugged in and it's not showing? Try another HDMI.
She said try another HDMI. I don't know if you heard her.
I don't know.
Yeah, I don't think there is another one. Is there one stuck down in here?
Today's our lucky day.
Oh, there's one.
can we move on to comments on the fact sheet while we sort out the presentation? Is that possible?
Sure.
Great, okay, so we'll move to 3B, comments on the fact sheet, and we'll come back to the community workshop while we figure out our technical difficulties.
I'll let you cover the fact sheet.
Okay. So yes, in your packet today, you have the fact sheets as well, and there's the 2 additional new ones that are for the South Palo Alto 2 tunnel alternatives that are in the packet. On the top also was the comments that we received from the XCAP and our response. So if you see something that you commented on and didn't get incorporated, then there's an explanation to why, or we said, yes, we'll do it. So you can kind of take a look through that. And then we also completed the evaluation summary with the South Palo Alto information.
Are the cost breakdowns information coming at the community meeting? Because I don't see them on the copy.
Yeah, they aren't on there for the, I have I'm working on the breakdown for that one still.
Great, and I did send in my comment a little while ago, so I wasn't expecting to be incorporated, but I did want to ask, is it possible that the profile view of the South Palo Alto Tunnel with freight at grade and the one with passenger and freight is inverted? Because I would assume that without freight, the train can go steeper, and that graphic shows that it goes at a 1.6 grade, whereas the other one goes to 2%.
I will check on that. I'll check.
Awesome, thank you.
Oh, did it come on?
Did XCAP members have anything else they wanted to say about the fact sheets that you didn't already mail in?
There we go.
Everybody's okay with the fact sheets? Okay, so then we'll move on to 3A, the community workshop presentation.
So this is just a quick overview. This is information that we've actually presented at previous CAP meetings, but it's a combination of the information or the presentations that we've done over the last several months. And since we have a very short time, I'm just kind of go through this at a high level. And then if you have any comments or on that, please let us know and we'll get those incorporated. But this is a draft of the presentation of what we plan to present at the community meeting on November 7th. Oh, I'm Eddie Mercurio. I'm the project manager for AECOM, with a consultant that's been hired by the city to evaluate these alternatives for grade separations. And sitting here with me here is Millette, who's also with AECOM. So this is just the cover letter. There'll be an introduction by City Manager Ed. Then it will move into an agenda. We will have Eileen Goodwin there. She'll be facilitating the public outreach like she has been in past meetings. And she'll be going through the agenda, giving the rules of how this presentation will be going. The general format of the presentation will be this PowerPoint. Then we'll have breakout 2 exhibits. And then we'll have a brief Q&A session, and then an adjournment on that, as it's shown here in the agenda. Next slide. We'll have a timeline.
To be coming.
Yeah. Next slide. Just quickly to go over, why, what is a grade crossing, to try and get, the basics down, and then the next couple slides are really kind of to address is why we're looking at a grade crossing. We have some of this is actually video clips from Menlo Park of people behaving badly on at grade crossings. And then this whole section here is really talking about why we're undertaking this effort. And then the next slide is really looking at what's happening as far as train counts that are going to be going up. And we'll probably insert a slide here. The next slide is talking about accident history. And we'll be inserting a slide here that will deal with what Hexagon has done, which is the unclearable queues, which is another reason that we're looking at a grade separation for this one. Then we'll move into the alternatives that have been evaluated so far to date. We will not, the Meadow Charleston alternatives will be out there as exhibits, but will not be covered in this presentation. But it will be, people have questions about those will be available. Those were presented back at the November, I believe, community meeting. But we'll be going over the South Palo Alto Tunnel, one with passenger and freight, and one with the freight left at grade. I'm just going to go quickly through this as we did this at a previous CAP meeting. Go through the cross sections. What we've been looking at is a twin bore tunnel. Starting with a cross section also for the portal section, and I think what were the comments that we got on this one is that we need to add dimensions, so we'll be adding those. And then we have the animation, which we won't go through here, but the animation is already posted to the website, so you'll be able to go through that. And I believe we've received comments on that animation as well. The next set of alternatives that we'll go through is the South Palo Alto when we leave the freight at grade, with a couple cross sections. And then we have the 3D animation, which is also posted on the site, but we won't go through that here today. Then we move on, which will also in this presentation go over the Churchill closures and the viaduct alternative as well. Starting with the options for the Churchill viaduct, where we have the again, as we presented before, we have to build a shoe fly in this particular instance to make this alternative work, and then we have excuse me, the 3D animation of the viaduct that we have presented before, and you guys have made comments on that. And then lastly, we'll go through the evaluation matrices that we've also received comments on, and we heard a couple more comments on those as related to the city-adopted criteria, and then also as related to the engineering challenges. And then we'll go through the Churchill alternatives, which is the Churchill closures and the different bike ped, excuse me, bike ped alternatives we've looked at. And finally, we'll close with some of the mitigation measures that the traffic consultant has come up with excuse me, for the Churchill closure. And then what we heard today is we will provide some definition of what mitigation means, as well as what do you mean by numbers?
Barbara, I'm
Data.
going to ask that you let her finish the presentation, Barbara, and then we'll do it during public comment. Thank you.
And excuse me. And these go through the mitigations that Hexagon will be speaking to. And finally, the last is the matrix that looks at the a city-adopted criteria, and then looks at the engineering criteria. And then that's when we'll have a short session where Eileen will take questions from the audience, and then it'll be breakout to the stations where people can have one-on-one with staff, and then we'll have a report back out from what the people at the stations heard. And then we will then put together a summary of the community meeting that will be posted to the website. And then
Sorry,
go back one slide, and these are the stations that we plan to have in and around the community meeting. So we'll have a station for Churchill, Palo Alto, Meadow Charleston, evaluation. We'll have a station for alternatives that have been evaluated but are no longer being under consideration. We'll have a traffic station, a noise vibration, and then a station for people to ask about the drainage and creeks in particular. So with that, that's a very high-level view of the presentation that will be presented at the November 7th community meeting, and that's it.
Judy has the first question.
Two questions. The first one is the Alma crossing, Alma Palo Alto Avenue crossing. There will be, since this is the first community meeting, you may get people from downtown north and from the business community downtown that is very interested in why that's not being included. And I would hope that when you do address that, that you explain how deciding all these other railroad separation crossing solutions don't sort of predetermine options for that crossing. Okay, that would be the first question.
So are you referring to the Palo Alto Avenue? the
That's
one
what I
that-
said.
Yeah. So that one was, that was originally in our scope.
No,
and
I
it was-
know that.
Yeah, and it was taken out because it was going to be part of a bigger downtown plan. Correct.
I know. What I'm saying is,
Say that, okay.
Yeah,
Thank
and
you.
actually-
Doing that is.
but it's a little bit, it's tweaked a little bit, because I think you need to explain to those that are downtown, and whether they're business or residents, explain how that won't, having all of these determined, won't already predetermine options for that last crossing, because I believe it will. That was the first question, and then this is maybe too minute or in the weeds, but when you have deaths or whatever, what were they called? Deaths? Fatalities. Can, when you have that slide, are you including suicides, or are these all vehicular pedestrian that are not suicides?
These are what we got from Caltrain, and so these are fatalities, whether they are
So-
pedestrian or
Okay, well,
car.
I think it would be helpful
Okay.
for this particular community to know whether you're talking about matters that have to do with accidents as opposed to other kinds of fatalities. Thank you.
Actually, Larry, did you want to go next?
I know it's on the agenda that you mentioned, but I would like to emphasize, or I hope you emphasize, the need, because I don't think the community is at all persuaded of the need as yet. I don't think I think you really need to go back to square one and spend more time on that than on solutions, because I think that, I don't know what the percentages are since we haven't done any polling. And so I think that that needs to be sort of double or triple starred as to what you need to do with this meeting.
So I just wanted to reflect what Judy just mentioned in my going out to talk to the business leaders in downtown. Their theoretical view is that the city on purpose leaves business out and then saddles them with the bill. Now, I don't think that's my city, and I wish we could change that opinion, but at least in this instance, we need to include the section of railroad that crosses downtown and will affect them most, and it also affords us the greatest connections. So I would ask Chair and Vice Chair to include this, to ask Council if we can include that in our study and not exclude the business community that has vital interest and predetermined conditions if we exclude them.
Thank you. I think Ada Young, and then I'll come back to you.
Okay, so I have comments on the presentation. It's kind of confusing. On page 20, you start with the Churchill closure and the Churchill viaduct, and next page is Churchill viaduct. So I think you should change the order. You should start with the closure first. Okay. I know numbers, but I think it's just hard to follow if they just consistent with the previous one. You have a South Palo Alto turnout first, and then next just the comments. I think it'll be easy to follow. And second comment is so you have these nice tables of impact, legend, improvement, and impact. I can guess somewhat because I've been attending this, but if it's a community, I think they wonder what they are. So maybe you need to explain what improvement is, what impact is. And then also in these tables, you have order of magnitude cost. This one, page 26, I think you already have numbers, but it's missing here. You need to fill it out. and also the construction years estimates, and you have that in the Churchill. And also, in the order of magnitude cost, I think you usually want to put their legend. If it's a, order of 10 times magnitude, it should be red, and then if not, it should be blue. If that is what the legend meant.
Just to respond to that, technically the cost item at the bottom is informational. It's not part of the official city council adopted criteria, so that's why we provided the information, but we haven't assigned it a color.
Okay. But, if I'm looking at it, this is why this is not. So if it's not city, so how do you want to present this information if it's not city adopted criteria? You shouldn't move that to the magnitude of the cost here then, because this table is about the city council adopted criteria.
If you're suggesting we could remove it from the row?
You need to have this information, but maybe not in here. Because it looks like it is city adopted criteria, because it's in this page. That's all.
Okay, Barbara?
On the Churchill closure options, I really like that every single one of these drawings shows big yellow box that says Churchill closure. The options of traffic mitigations and street improvements as part of the closure. So I assume that means that the estimated cost of 50 to 65 million for a closure includes the traffic and
Yes, it
improvements.
does.
Yeah.
And if I could just ask an additional question, because I've gotten a couple questions about wanting to see that broken down by location on the fact sheets, which would be different from all the other fact sheets. So, just thoughts. That's why we haven't done it that way, because it's listed as part of the closure in the description, so that's included in the cost.
So one other question on the cost specifically is, for the tunnel and the trench, the cost is for Churchill and, for Meadow and Charleston together. Question
Yes.
is, does the hybrid also include Meadow and Charleston together? That is the full total cost for the
Yes.
two of them together?
Yes.
Okay, all right. I think we just want to
So,
make that clear in the.
I have one, I'm not quite done, but one more question. On page 28 then, when you list the street improvements, intersection improvements, is this exhaustive in its totality, or are there other improvements? And it's a leading question. What I'm hoping to see is that, as Judy and I pointed out earlier, when you improve the traffic and throughput from on Embarcadero from Alma down to El Camino, you have Town and Country on one side and Palo Alto on the other. It's already a really impacted intersection, super impacted. So increasing the throughput is going to increase the backup, because people want to take a right into Town and Country and a left into Pali, and that's going to be a big problem. So I think that's why we asked for the traffic study to include that intersection. So we're hoping that mitigations are also included in there.
Correct. So in the traffic study, we had, I don't remember the exact number, but it was something like 25 intersections that we identified and analyzed.
Mm-hmm.
And at that, at the breakout station that's called traffic, we will have that map as well as the level of service calcs for
Okay.
all of the intersections of those 25 intersections that were studied. So the ones that you see summarized there were triggered, that it had an impact, so we had to do something to mitigate it. So that's what it whittles down to, basically, from the traffic analysis, that those are intersections that are impacted and that we need to make an improvement to get to an acceptable level of service.
And that's what I'm afraid of, because what's not included here is the intersection at Town and Country and Pali on Embarcadero. I mean, you can have all the throughput you want from Alma to El Camino, and it's all going to back up right at that intersection. It does right now. I mean, big time. So
Well,
the
I'll
business
confirm
owners
that
are gonna-
intersection was
yeah.
included in the study.
Okay, thank you. Especially at lunchtime.
Town and Country and.
Yeah, so I see is this close enough? So on the weekday train traffic, where it says total numbers of trains per weekday, and it says to be updated, is the to be updated going to be updated to include the information from the Caltrain business plan about the number of trains that could potentially be expected from Caltrain?
Yes, I think it's out of date what we have there, so I need to go back and do a check of that.
Okay, yeah, that would be important, because right now, using the old information, it makes it look like the only thing that would really cause a significant increase in trains would be a high-speed rail, and high-speed rail is not moving very quickly, and so that could lead somebody to say, well, gee, this isn't really needed any time in the foreseeable future, whereas the Caltrain business plan, has now stated goals of greatly increasing trains, whether or not the high-speed rail shows up. So that's an important point to make, like also addressing, Larry Klein's question or comment and others about why.
Pat?
I wanted to say thank you to Judy Kleinberg about the comment on the collision page. First of all, the 10-year history, I'm wondering if that includes 2009 to 2000, or 2008 to 2018, what the time frame was. We had 2 clusters during that time frame involving youth suicides. There should be at least 9 listed, and one occurred 200 feet from the Churchill crossing. So that's not indicated, and I'm not sure why. The FRA now calculates all of the deaths as well as the fatalities and the injuries, and suicides are counted separately. So I just think that needs to be more accurate.
We only have a few more minutes on this item, so if anybody has anything pressing, you can say it. Otherwise, we can always send in comments via email. So Tony, and then I see In Young again.
So just a question, clarification on the new intersection that you propose at High and Embarcadero. Does that intersection have the capacity to alleviate and count all of the traffic from Churchill that will now go on to that lane?
Yes, it does.
So I think you did you did say you were going to add more dimensions on this picture, but I just want to make a record out of it. So page 18, you have South Palo Alto tunnel. You have dimensions for the horizontal, where the tunnel is, where the cupola is. But if you look at the page 24, Churchill Viaduct, you don't have that. And also 23, 22, 23, 24 need those dimensions.
Barbara Beth, sorry, one more thing on page 28 for the Churchill closure. Increasing the traffic on Embarcadero is going to possibly put the bike path from students that are coming from as far as Emerson all the way down to Alma. I'd like to see the bike path be part of the focus of improvements along Embarcadero.
Okay. Do you have anything? Okay, Carrie, we've got Carrie.
Generally, I think most of this presentation is ready for the public. I just want to echo some of the comments I've heard about the town and country area. I think that it needs work. We do need to share with people where we're at, but I think making it clear which alternatives have been completely worked through and which ones are in an earlier process would be helpful in framing the discussion.
The only thing I'll add is on page 28, you have, as part of the first bullet under Embarcadero improvements, you have widen the Alma Street Bridge. It's a historic bridge. I think it should be called out as its own bullet, and that point needs to be made. Same thing on the fact sheets, because I realize that there isn't anything on there that indicates that.
Okay, so let's get a clarity. It has a potential to be a historic bridge because of its age, but it hasn't actually been identified as a historic bridge at this point in time.
Okay. The Caltrain, okay, great, good to know.
Yeah,
But I would put
but-
that on there because people will ask, because it is the oldest underpass.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then also on the viaduct, I remember that the Stanford Station is impacted, and I didn't see that called out in any of the graphics, so we might need to at least put note somewhere that that's happening. Also, on the page that has the traffic mitigations for Embarcadero, page 34, it says install additional westbound left turn lane, but it doesn't indicate what road you're talking about. So it took me a minute or two to read the traffic diagram and understand exactly what that was. And I would just like to echo the concerns of, it sounds like you're going to have an exhibit with traffic that will show the mitigations and will show how those things get rated and how the rating changes, but I think that's certainly something that would be helpful, so. Okay, I'm going to open it up. So the 3C is an informational item, so we will be having a future presentation about it. This is the public safety memos from the Palo Alto Fire Department and the Palo Alto Police Department. For those of you in the audience, the copies are available on the side. That talks about whether their opinions on what would happen if Churchill closed, and so you can read about that, but we will have them hopefully at a future meeting. I just wanted to point that out. And then, do we have members from the public who'd like to speak to any of the 3 items that we've heard here? Number 3. Okay, I see 2 people. So you can each have 2 minutes. You can go ahead up to the microphone.
I'm Deborah Bennett. I live near the Churchill intersection. I'm curious, for those of us who would be citizens who are unable to attend the meeting on November 7th, what alternative method there is to provide input and perhaps see a recording of the meeting, because I will not be able to attend.
So the meeting will be recorded and videotaped, so that will be available as soon as, and the same gentlemen who are taping this today are going to be the people that will be videotaping that, and that'll get posted to the website. And then comments and question, I think you can always send those to the city, and we'll be addressing those as we get those. And there'll be comment cards well, again, you're not going to be at the community meeting, but if you have any, just email them in.
So could we have that announced when we announce this meeting? Can you also announce, for those who can't attend, here's how to look for it? Because often that kind of thing isn't announced, and I always end up sending up email, and then I get a personal reply, but it doesn't help the other citizens in my area. Thank you.
I would also give you the advocate's hint of you can always email the city council address, and that at least ensures it gets published in the packet, so it at least gets recorded. But thank you for that comment.
Hi, I'm Tom Kellerman. So just one clarification point on the Churchill closure and the budget for that with the mitigations. Am I correct that that budget of, I think it's 50 to 65 million, includes the closure itself, the bicycle underpass at Churchill, and the revisions of the Embarcadero-Alma intersection? And if that's true, that's great, but it seems cheap relative to other things. It's surprising to me that, particularly with the Alma Street Bridge, et cetera, that could be done at that price.
Yes, it includes all those improvements.
Okay, last comment. Thank you.
Steve Carlson, on the viaduct, there is no acquisition of properties that is required for that. But I think that the residents who are along Mariposa feel that there is some property impact, and specifically potential impact on property values. And I'm just, and I think that I'm just wondering at what point that might be addressed. I think it's, from my perspective, better to have that considered earlier rather than later. And yeah, I think of it when I look at the budget. I think that you know, I don't think it's actually a large impact on the budget, but I do think that it would. I think that those residents are have the concern that that won't be part of the consideration, and I think most of us would agree that if by some objective measures that there was property impact, that that we wouldn't necessarily expect those residents to kind of bear the burden of that for the good of the city. So there's always a slippery slope argument, but I think if you look at the whole picture, that those properties are very unique in terms of the width, in terms of the potential distance from the fence, some of them the ones closest to Pierce Park in particular, and that it would be, the impact there would be different than viaduct anywhere else along the corridor. And so it's not clear to me who would be the ones that would make that decision to allocate some budgetary number toward that, but I just would like to ask that there be some consideration of it, discussion about the timing of addressing that. Thanks.
Okay, great, thank you. Okay, so now we're moving on to item number 4. This is the action item on guiding principles amendment. We have budgeted 20 minutes for that, so I'm just going to I have brought my own little visual timer just so I don't screw up this time. So I had passed out, or Chantal had posted on the website for everyone to look at some suggestions for voting procedures and a definition of consensus. So as a reminder, City Council has asked this committee to try to achieve a consensus recommendation, and while obviously we would love nothing but unanimity, when push comes to shove, if at some point we have to get a report to City Council, we want to be sure to really clearly define what the rules are going to be. If we don't get to unanimous, how are we going to operate as a group? So the intention of this discussion is to have the ex-CAP members, hopefully they've been able to read this, and sort of chime in on what the opinions are in terms of how to handle voting for things and how to handle also the final report. So I'll open it up to my colleagues and see where they want to start, if anyone has a burning question or wants to start the discussion.
My main concern is our voting procedures. As to the background, I think that's nice to have in there, but unnecessary. I'm referring to the first page. A lot of that is behavior, I think, that we all learned very early on in life, just how you get along with each other. So we don't really need to have all that, but I don't have any objection to it. I do have an objection to how we're ultimately going to come to decisions. I think that the only real fair democratic way to do it is by a majority of the people who are here and voting. That means if we have 14 people here, it means 8 people voting in favor of whatever it is. I think that supermajority votes are, one, impractical in that if our final recommendations go to the council, and let me use 14 as the denominator, and we have 10 people voting in favor of whatever it is, and 4 opposed, we've taken no action if you have a supermajority of 3/4. And I think that's an unreasonable outcome. We've been tasked with getting recommendations to the council, and to come up with something that's a non-recommendation seems to me to make no sense. Secondly, I think, as I said, it's undemocratic because it gives the people who are dissenting more authority, more power than those who are voting the other way. Under that rationale, 14 people, 4 can hold up the action. A 10-4 vote is not 3/4. And why should those 4 really have more authority, more power than the 10? Or really, to put it in gross, sort of approximate terms, twice as much power as the other people on the committee. And I think it's also impractical. The council is going to look at, this is all public record. It's all transparent. So what are we achieving by saying that we need to have a 3/4 vote to go to the council? So I would change it all to saying that we achieved majority. Now, of course, in any situation, you want to get as many people in favor of what you're recommending. But I think by doing this, by setting it up as a supermajority, you're actually achieving the opposite. You're encouraging people to dig in their heels because they have the authority to do so. it doesn't encourage them to come to a consensus with the other people on board. I think it really ends up just the opposite. So I would change all of that section on voting to say that this, like many other organizations in Palo Alto and anywhere else in the world, we're going to proceed by a majority vote.
In general, I understand what you're saying and probably agree with most of it. My big concern is, let's say there's an 8-6 final vote, and we're delivering this report to the council with our recommendation, but only 8 people agree. We really haven't given anything to the council. We've just kind of kicked the ball down the road. So I think if we can strive, instead of having that be 8-6, be 11-3 or 10-4, I think that has done the council a lot of good, because now we have much more clarity in our recommendation. 8-6 really doesn't give the council anything.
Totally agree. But how do you get there?
Yeah.
I don't think you get there by giving more authority to people who are, in effect, dissenting from what the majority thinks. I think just the opposite, that you are far more likely to get 10, 11, 12, maybe even 14 people voting for something if you know you're going to proceed by a majority vote, and you horse trade. That's the way I think, I can get your vote, for example, if I agree to add a foot here or subtract a foot there. But if you know that you can cause the group to take no action whatsoever, you have no reason to compromise.
This is definitely an important discussion, so thank you for trying to help us set this at the beginning. I'm concerned about the nature of our group if we think about a majority model, majority-only model, because this is not an elected body, it's not an appointed body. This is a assembled body of people with representing certain interests. So we have a person from the business community, we have someone from the school, we have neighbors, we have a variety of different interests. And I think that the idea of coming to a recommendation that people with all these different points of view that they're representing can agree on is really important. So I'm inclined to support the consensus model that's proposed here, even though it is a lot. It does require us to come together, but I also feel like that's sort of our charter, right? That's what we're supposed to do, is to try and find something that addresses the needs of all the different points of view that we're representing. So.
Judy, before I let you speak, I just wanted to put, for those that are lost in the audience, because we recognize that the agenda item is not posted on here, it's the document that says to XCAP from Nadia Nayak, re-proposed language for voting on issues of consensus in the final report, for those of you following along. Judy?
Thank you. This is tough for anyone that's a fan of democracy. I guess there's just a few points. I think, Larry, I would, in all due respect, turn this around a little bit and not put the onus on those that have a different minority opinion, as they're the ones that are holding things up and ruining this consensus kumbaya. I would rather put it on those that are in the majority to not have convinced those that don't agree with them that is a compromise or a good way to approach it. And I think those in the majority have a responsibility to reach out to those that don't agree yet and find out why and try to persuade them to agree. So I would turn it around and put the onus on the majority. That's the first thing. The second is, I don't know exactly what that balance is, but I agree with Keith that that's hardly, 8-6 just hardly doesn't give me an overwhelming sense. I hate to get to the numbers. I really love the idea of let's get to some kind of middle ground consensus, but since we're now a voting body, we have to deal with this. I also want to talk about the section under section 2 that has to do with voting, number 4, voting. I would ask that some of this language about those that dissent be removed completely. The line that says individuals who are preventing the group from making the decision should examine themselves closely to assure that they're not withholding consensus out of self-interest, bias, vengeance, or any other feeling. I mean, excuse me. Please. I would really like to see this be
Judy, can you
more
tell me where that is exactly?
page, whatever, no number, under 4.
Oh, gotcha. Thank you.
I would really like this group to reflect the ethos of our community, which is what we strive to get along and respect each other and not start out of the gate saying those that don't agree might have some onerous self-interest. There are going to be a lot of...
seeing that language.
Let me just say, I just read it to you. Let me continue. There are going to be a lot...
I was
Let me
looking at
just
not section 4.
continue.
Okay.
It is section 4, under voting.
Wrong document.
Number 4, 4th paragraph. I could point out some others, but this is all... Section 2, number 4. I'll read it again if you'd like. This is the first sentence. I mean, there's others. You see where I'm going with this whole conversation? It points out that those to dissent need to do a self-examination, that maybe they harbor some vengeance or bias or something. Okay, now you get the picture. All right, I would like to see us reflect the best of our community and model that in this committee, because there will be dissent. Absolutely. We're in a democracy, and we have very smart people in this community, and they are not going to all agree. Let's not start out by saying it's their problem. I think I've made my point.
No clapping or booing. We can't allow that. Thank you. Go ahead, Dave.
Just a quick one on Judy's point. If we are to go and potentially talk to the others who think who would probably vote against what we're think or what we want to vote on, how would we do that in the context of the Brown Act? So that's just kind of a question. And then the second one, what's that? Oh, well, beyond here, maybe, I don't know. Then my next thought was just a concern that we only have a certain amount of time, and that it looks like it's almost like a waterfall, right? If we don't get consensus, then we fall to supermajority or something like that. So if there's going to be 2 votes on these kind of things, then how do we do that in the context of we only have till April next year? So that's just a concern I have.
Sure.
In the emotion of my speaking. In the work plan, which I read, there is a statement, and I could find it if you need me to find it, about the final report to the city council, which says that the majority or the committee or something, I should go find it, will state the dissenting opinion. And it's somewhere in there, and I would prefer that those that have a dissent word it and state it themselves.
Sure.
Okay,
so
that was in the work plan.
Totally. So this is, even the work plan is all up for discussion, and so I really appreciate the comments. And I copied that paragraph. I went through about 15 different documents on consensus. So to be honest, this was not my wording, but I appreciate the fact that the tenor doesn't really match. I think actually my intended tone is more on the link that is to the American Heart Association's document, which I realize I should have included in full, and rather than making it a link that we now can't look at. So my apologies. I'm still figuring this out.
It wasn't a criticism of you, it was an observation.
Oh, no,
of the
no.
comment.
It's,
Okay.
didn't take it that way. Yes, absolutely. Adina, go ahead.
All right, so, minor point in supporting what Judy said about that language, which I did not see when I first read through the material, and looking at that, I agree with that. Sounds like there would be like plays to write about the story that envisions, but like not the right guiding. And on the process for reaching agreement and voting, I like to build on some things that Carrie had said, because this group is not like a council policymaking body, voting on a policy or ordinance, something like that. It's a recommendation, and the recommendation is intended to show the perspective of a set of community members that represent different viewpoints in the community. And because of that, it seems like powerful to have a super majority of people who have come together in being able to endorse whatever it is being recommended. And it's because of that nature of the body as being recommendations, like also in terms of what the city council is going to do in order to go ahead and make a decision and then do things that might cost the community money to pay for it. That's something that is very difficult to do. And if there is something that it's like a 6-4, like very split and very dissenting, it's going to be hard to get something implemented and hard to get something done. So showing that like this group has been able to come up with a broader agreement, like bodes well for being able to be giving the council something that they would eventually be able to decide upon and implement. So that's my thought about that topic.
Thank you, Adina. Tony?
So one of the major criteria I think we may take it for granted is that we include everyone. But at this point, I get the feeling that the downtown folks are excluded, and with a lot of implications for how it'll go through. And I don't think that's the intention, but I think the downtown plan sort of slipped, or it may be intentional, hopefully not. I think we need to include that section.
So I think we have to focus on what we can do our own rules, but I hear you about the downtown thing, and perhaps for the, before, we're supposed to go back to city council with an update, most likely tentatively at the December 9th meeting. So prior to that, I will schedule on the agenda a conversation about whether we have thoughts about Palo Alto Avenue, the downtown. If this is something that the group feels really strongly about, we could at least say something to council at that point. But probably, at least for the consensus of this group, we have to focus on what we want to do here. But thank you for that. I hear that. Anybody else? Inyo? Larry?
Yes, no matter how we come out on this, I think there are various wording changes that need to be made, and I'll come back to that. But I think we ought to set the policy before we get to the wording. I think Carrie said we're not an elected or appointed group. Obviously, we're not elected, but we indeed are appointed, just as much as any other advisory group to the city. And as far as I can recall, all of the advisory groups to the city operate on a majority vote basis. By saying we should operate on a majority vote basis, that doesn't at all preclude the idea that we should hope to get to a unanimity. And that's the true, I think, of any democratic organization, whether it's appointed or elected. You'd love to be able to get a unanimous vote. Failing that, you'd like to get a 13-1 vote. But you do have to reach decisions, and I think that thinking that by just setting that you're going to have a supermajority voting rule at the end isn't going to make it so. And you're going to have to, no matter what it is, you're going to have to try to work with everybody to reach a decision. And I think, though, that the key is you have to reach a decision. And it seems to me the clear way to do that is the tried and true way of a majority vote.
Go ahead, Barbara.
I guess I'd also like to point out that I think that we also exist to connect back to our constituents that we represent. I think in this room we may be successful in convincing any one of us to a certain point of view. Our job, though, is to represent the people that we represent. And so in a sense, I agree with Larry, because I think if I'm a city council member that has to make a decision, the ex-cap decision is one of the data points that I'll be considering. And if the ex-cap comes to me with a decision that got an 8-6 vote, that tells me a lot about what the community thinks, that maybe there's no good solution, that any solution is going to have some downfall. And that's an important data point for the the city council to consider.
Carrie said she wanted to say something. I'll give you a mic. While we're moving the mic over, I'd also wanted to get feedback on the part about the final report, because one of the ideas was if we do end up with an 8-6 vote, to the extent that we may not have an answer, we may not be able to give an answer, frankly, because we may not get some of the data that we're missing to even give an answer. But what I was attempting to, and definitely wordsmithing is appreciated here, so this is my best throw, but I was attempting to sort of represent that as much as we could decide, or at least agree to as a group, as a finding and maybe not a recommendation. So that might be some, and I'm just going to totally make this up, and this does not indicate a position, but if, for example, we all decided as a group, well, gee, we don't know what to do about Churchill, but we agree that if you were going to fix the bike problem, part of the bike problem is that all of the bikes collect on one side when there's a traffic light and have to wait to go to the other side. And that we would see that as something that it generally would be a comment that we would note, that we all agreed that that was an issue, then that might be some way to sort of, mitigate the fact that we may end up at an 8-6, but at least try to, as much as possible, attempt to talk about findings. So, Carrie, go ahead.
Sure, and thank you, Larry, for giving me a chance to clarify. I realized after I said it, I didn't quite explain myself. What I was trying to distinguish is that the appointments and the makeup of this body is different than other boards and commissions, that we really did make an effort on the part of the council to populate this group with various points of view, and that we're not a policy body, we're doing some recommendations. So I appreciate the chance to clarify that. And on the point of whether we can achieve the consensus, which is our goal, I think it's fine to start out defining what we would feel was a consensus vote. If we can't achieve that, obviously we will include our comments with the report back to the city council, but being able to define, well, if we got this far, if we got 3/4 of the people to agree, that's what success might look like. It's very important for us to understand what success might look like. Getting 100% would be ideal, right? But we do have fallback options in here, that if we can't get to consensus, or what we agree is consensus, that we will still make a recommendation, or that we will still provide comments and feedback to the council. So I feel comfortable with that.
I'm sorry,
So my concern is what something Larry outlined, which is the power that shifts to the minority, to the fore, and that's uncomfortable for me, and I don't know how to solve it. But it doesn't feel like a democracy that way.
So ultimately, I would say that in a lot of the stuff that I read about consensus, frankly, a lot of it depends on the chair, and if not the vice chair, whoever's sort of running the meeting. So if we're at a point where we're really at an 8-6, then part of it is we probably need to go back and figure out where we all split up. And so to the extent that, how much time we have to do those things, that may be part of the issue. And so that's exactly why I want to delineate a fallback of what happens if we get there. But part of it is really just trying to, and I would also say that the council tasked us with consensus. So in some ways, I feel like we can't actually just say we're going to do simple majority, because the motion was actually that we're voting on consensus. And so actually altering that, it's okay for us to have a sort of a fallback. But if we just made it a simple majority, in the end, that seems to sort of have defeated what they were seemed to be attempting to get us to do. So that's just my own view. Sure, Pat?
Well, in terms of the four, I think there needs to be a rationale as to why those people are opposing, or at least having questions in their minds as far as voting in the affirmative way. And so once we have that information, and it's based on facts and not just, let's say, intuitive information or feelings, once we have that information and we are able to persuade those individuals based on the majority's view, I think so long as we have due diligence and we address that, I think then once we have that consensus, so long as we have really truly addressed those four people and their issues, I think we can go forward on the consensus.
I agree with that, and I also want to say this, I don't see this as all or nothing. I think that whatever that majority opinion or the most favored compromise, whatever that is, there's still going to be drawbacks. There are going to be cons as addition to the pros. And I think that the concerns, rather than calling it dissents, but the concerns, to be fair, I think the council expects us to give us those points of view because we only represent who we represent and what we've heard, and there's just a lot more out there. So I think we can fashion our recommendations in terms of nothing's black and white, and we give them the whole picture. And I think that maybe gives some comfort to those who don't agree necessarily with the 8 or 12 or however many people think it's a good option.
Larry, I have a question for you. So the way we have this agenda is we have the consensus, and then we have something about phone meeting participation, and then any other amendments. And I'm mindful that we also need to take public comment on this item. So how do you want to go through those next two and then take public comment and then go to your motion or potential motion, or?
I haven't made a motion. Before that, let me correct the math. I've been assuming 3/4 was in the earlier draft, but actually Nadia's last draft is 2/3. On the other hand, the 2/3 majority, and on page, the fourth page, I guess, of a report.
I have 2/3 and 3/4. You can choose.
Yeah. No, but the math on 2/3 is incorrect on the draft. 2/3 of all present, 14 is 10, not 9. You got to get, because 9/14 is less than 66.7%. So take those two things and you still get to the same idea, but the math is one vote different. No, I think that this is an important issue, and we ought to just take up the policy question, and so hear from the public now, and then we can go back to the other ones.
Okay, so do we have any members of the public who'd like to speak on the issue of consensus, or actually any of the other two, correct? We can come back, okay. Go ahead, yep. Rachel, there's a handheld mic. I think you weren't here yet, and you have 2 minutes.
I guess Rachel Kraft, my concern is the timeline, and along the lines of how you guys are going to get to consensus. I think it's going to be super critical that you get as many technical questions answered as you have. So this is really a comment for the city, to urge the city to get AECom to help this group as much as possible to answer those technical questions so that you have the best information at your disposal when you're making a decision on behalf of your residents in the city. So, for example, I think renderings are ultra critical. The reason for renderings is to give people a sense for what the experience of a solution is actually going to be. So I think the renderings must be as accurate as possible. For
Rachel,
instance,
can I have you focus on the consensus part, because otherwise I'll put you a different agenda item. It's okay.
Okay. That's it, as I just urging the technical details to be there so that you guys can get to a consensus, because I'm concerned that it'll be difficult to do so without the technical detail.
Thank you. Pat Burt, please. Former Mayor Pat Burt.
Good afternoon. I'd really like to encourage the group to adopt a strong supermajority of 3/4 or more. In actually elected governing, we have simple majorities in most matters, although not all. But I've been involved also in a series of multi-stakeholder groups in environmental policy at the state level, regional, and otherwise. And in each of those cases, having a consensus supermajority was crucial for the end product to be widely supported by both the public and by the legislative bodies that we were recommending to. In this case, if we don't have community consensus as represented in this group, we are standing a far diminished likelihood of getting the voter support that we'll need for our local funding and the support for the design outcomes. So I encourage you to continue on this path.
Thank you. And
Roland will be our last speaker.
Yeah. So I'd like to very briefly echo what the last two speakers said. The issue right now is that the information that you have got is inaccurate and is divisive. Once we iron that out and we give you accurate facts on which you can make your decision, I guarantee you it's going to make it much easier for all of you to achieve a super majority. Thank you.
Okay, we'll bring it back. Larry? Okay, maybe the easiest way to do this is to do a straw poll before we sort of keep moving forward and see where we are. So if my math is wrong, then does that mean that 2/3, I'm sorry, I lost my page now, that 2/3 and basically 3/4 at 14 still makes it 10 would be about? Okay, 3/4 is 11. Half of a person. You can round up, so if all 14 were here, but it's supposed to be of who's present. So I think the thing that we really need to also focus on is it's gonna matter who's here when we're making decisions. That's a big deal. And I just want to be clear that this will be whatever we vote on will be of the people present, because I think that that's sort of critical going forward. So I just want to, okay, fine. How many people are in favor of, yeah, the options are A, 2/3, which is, what did we say? 10. Thank you. 2/3, which would be 10. Or a simple majority, which would be 8, right?
No, but if there's less than 10 people, you can't say 10, so you have to say percentage.
Right, so great, 51% versus 66.6% of whoever's present. So vote for 66%. Straw poll, yeah, okay. So vote for 51%. Okay, go ahead, Carrie.
I have a question. So if we are, if we do believe that we each are representing a point of view, and we aren't able to be here, if some points of view aren't going to be represented by the appointee for a vote, do they get to delegate to someone else to vote on their behalf, or express some other way, like through an email? I don't know what's allowed in the Brown Act, but
so I think
that may become complicated.
I thought the point was that you're not, I think no to delegation, because it would be complicated. You happen to be on PTC, but I'm just in a neighborhood, so I can't send somebody else. I think based on the guiding principles that we adopted, the new sort of spirit of the XCAP is not that you are here to represent PTC's position, but however that your experience from PTC helps inform what you think would be right based on the work you're doing in this group. So same would be for Barbara, and I think that should be clarified, to be honest.
I think for me, I'm in a different situation, but there are people here with certain points of view, and if we were to take a vote without hearing their point of view, we may be losing out. Mm-hmm. So I'm just throwing that out there. I don't know if that means everybody needs to come all the time, but yeah, we need to be really clear about that, especially because it will get complicated, because we'll be taking votes, and yeah.
I think the best way that we can address that is making sure that we're making it clear when a vote is coming, so everyone can be sure that they can attend. And if we know that either, we have key constituencies that might not be available for that we make that clear. But as much as possible, trying to make sure we put that forth.
Yeah, I want to say that people here may be originally appointed because they were part of a neighborhood group or something else, but we don't have every group in town represented. And so we have to assume that the people are voting their own consciences. If they want to confer with their neighborhood association, or Judy wants to confer with her chamber board of trustees or something like that, fine, that's that individual member's choice. But we are still individuals, and so the whole idea is it's your responsibility to be at the meeting where votes are going to be taken, and if you can't, we understand, but that we can't hold up, or else we're never going to get done.
And just to clarify, I checked with the city attorney on this. So if you're unable to come to a meeting, you can send someone. A good example is last time someone came and sat in the audience for PAUSD so that they can get the information. But that person that's coming and listening for you is not able to vote for you. So that would not be a proxy. And then if you wanted to send information in, you can obviously try to send your information to someone else and say, can you please say that I said this? But that still would not account in the voting process itself. So voting is you must be present to vote.
So did the city attorney analyze, for example, I wasn't appointed to this group. No, the Chamber of Commerce was asked to have a representative. I was not appointed to the group. So did the city attorney rule that I must always be the person? It's unusual.
I want to clarify how we just voted and make sure.
That was just a straw poll, so
Straw
just to
poll,
get a sense
yes.
of where we are, yeah.
But it may be an issue of semantics. Regardless of whether it's 7-7 or 8-6 or 13-1, we're going to give a report. But for me, I want it to be 2/3 be called a recommendation. And so regardless, it's not like if it's 8-6, we're just going to pack up and go home and not tell the council anything. We will be a debriefing to the council, but it doesn't carry the official name of a recommendation.
Correct. What I was imagining is that a recommendation would be, that's what the vote would signify, and anything else would simply be a finding, and we would try to disclose, okay, it was an 8-6, and these were the findings, and these are the two viewpoints, and still trying to give ideas or recommendations or as much meat as we can, because we will have invested so much time and effort at that point that all we can give, right, would be helpful.
Okay.
Just to follow up on what Larry and Chantal said, we don't necessarily have every group represented at this table, so whether someone's absent or not, representatives of any group can attend in the public and speak on behalf of their group. So that's just to make sure that that's clear.
I'm bad at finding things on the spot, but I thought we had a sentence in there about if folks needed to carry something over to a next meeting, like, hey, I really have to go back and check with the folks that I communicate with about a specific thing. Can we hold that over to the next meeting? That obviously we would try to do that. I mean, again, this is not to block anybody out of some kind of vote, The idea is that we're really going to try to work with each other, and this is why, as we get closer to the end, we really will need everybody attending and participating. Yeah, Judy?
I don't know if this is workable because it adds time to our effort, but maybe it's valuable time. Let's say I wanted to poll my members, or I had a conversation with the people that own and manage Town and Country. I could come to a meeting and we could do a check-in with whom we've spoken to. We do this at city council meetings. If somebody talks to Joe Simidian, let's say, about county money or something, it would be helpful to know who's talking to whom and what they're hearing. And so we can share that, and we don't suddenly come with an opinion everybody's blindsided by the opinion that might actually influence some of that outcome and while it takes time at the meeting, I think it's important for everybody to know whom we are talking with and what we're hearing. I think that would be, for me, very helpful.
Thank you for sharing. So we actually already have that on the agenda as an ongoing item. So actually, item number 7, which is XCAP community conversations, that was sort of intended as your time to be able to say, hey, I talked to my membership, or I talked to my... Yes, today. Number 7. Flip it over. It's going to be a long meeting. We're trying to save paper, I know. So the XCAP community and conversations previously was used for, folks who've had neighborhood conversations. So that would be a great way to do it. Thank you for that. Okay, Larry, I keep saying Larry because I thought you were going to give a draft motion that we're going to.
Oh, you want to take it? Yes. Well, but you may want to hear from Judy on, well, I'll incorporate it since I agree with Judy that paragraph is sort of insulting.
We agree.
Okay, so my amendment is to, well, this isn't on the floor yet, so I will move the proposal that you recommended, Nadia, with these changes. 1, delete the 4th paragraph under number 4.
Yes.
And in the last paragraph, to read it this way, in the event that unanimous consensus recommendation for the final report cannot be achieved, XPAC shall reach its decision by a 2/3 majority vote, 2/3 of the members present and voting vote, period. The report will indicate the dissenting viewpoints as either findings or dissenting recommendations, while the rest is, as the last sentence
Great.
is as you addressed.
Chantal, is there any way we can put this up on the screen so everyone can see what we're?
The key language is that the ex-cap shall reach its decision by a 2/3 majority vote.
Oh, Philip, I guess it's you.
But did that eliminate the bit about trying to reach consensus at a maximum of twice? Or are you
Yes.
attempting to remove that?
Yeah, that was. Because you can get there at a meeting. Anyway, we have earlier language that says that you can have you'll want to have a second meeting so people have time to confer and think about it. That's earlier on in the principles.
Go ahead, Karen.
Judy, do we want to, how much do you want to change the word dissent to concerns?
It's interesting, when Larry was just reading that, I was thinking, again, I think it polarizes us to talk about dissent, and it would be better to call it, then people do feel safe and confident, I love those words, if they can just express their concerns. That would just be a more welcome and inclusive way to include people who have those concerns. Yeah.
We don't have a second motion yet.
So, sorry, can you propose what language so concerned citizens?
I think I was
what do we-
actually proposed, thank you for letting me propose an amendment to Larry's motion that didn't have a second.
Yeah, sorry. Thank you. Carrie seconds it. Go
Okay.
ahead. Now it can be
Okay.
official. Sorry, still in training.
You know, I hope this isn't just so picayune, but I think we are trying to express a sort of a way that we want to talk to each other and respect each other. And so instead of saying dissent, if we could say concerns or even disagreement, it's just much more polite than saying dissent. You're not agreeing with me, I can tell.
You want to say disagreement?
That was a disagreement and concern.
Yeah,
How
go ahead,
about you?
Adina. Do you have a recommendation?
So I have two questions about this.
Sorry,
and-
hold on. Adina, I think Larry has to decide if he's accepting.
No, I
or-
don't accept it.
Okay. He doesn't accept. Go ahead, Adina.
Okay, so I have a question about that, like, two of these things from the motion on the table and proposed alternatives. So one is the comment that this will be applied a maximum of twice. There's a comment that is redundant and therefore can be struck here. Is that accurate? I don't 100% understand exactly which language is where, so I just want to verify that is
Agreed on that.
accurate, that this is redundant.
Right. I didn't think it was redundant. I thought this part, Larry, refers specifically only to the final report.
Okay.
So that it only, what it does is it makes sure that when we get towards the very end, that we get 2 go-rounds, and if after 2 go-rounds of trying to get to 2/3, we can't, then we call it whatever findings is gonna be, and then that's it. So we tried to, I think the intent was to try to cap it so that it didn't go on forever. That was, I know, one of the concerns that you and I had discussed. So that was the intent of that language, because it's specifically only for the final report.
I'm willing to go along with it because I think it's close to meaningless.
Okay, and then the other thing is, in terms of dissent, I hear that, but replacing it, like, I'm wondering whether if someone has an alternative viewpoint, maybe something that is less harsh, but also more constructive would be alternative. So somebody really has a strong opinion that they don't agree with the supermajority of the group, and they have a positive alternative that is a minority different view. I think just calling it an alternative might achieve all the goals that we're talking about.
Sure, so you're saying instead of either findings or dissenting recommendations, it would be findings or alternative recommendations.
Yeah.
Judy, does that capture that for you?
I think it does. I'm trying to read through the kind of the flow now. and
Yeah,
see
it's
how
hard
that all
it's hard
reads.
without having it on the screen. So, does the maker accept that then?
Say again?
Alternative instead of dissenting.
It's just not true. Come on, I mean, this is almost Orwellian. A negative vote's a negative vote. It's a no vote.
I think it's about the spirit, so.
It's also a recommendation to council, so it's a council vote would be a no vote. A advisory body vote is, here's an alternative that we want council to consider from our minority viewpoint. So I think it is meaningful, given that we're an advisory body.
You're playing games with the language, you know. When somebody voting no, he or she's voting no, but I sense the group likes that type of stuff here, so be it.
Go, Judy?
I guess, you know, we're doing semantics here, but we're all struggling to try and come up with something that is representative of the differences of opinions that are going to absolutely happen. And so I guess you can call it dissent, I guess, but in reading through this, the final report is coming from the staff or the consultants.
No, they're helping us to write it.
Change that language?
That's what it says, that they will help us.
It's the final report. I'm sorry, it says.
Drafted by staff and the consultants at the
Yes.
direction of ex-cap members
Okay.
based on the
So
deliberations.
drafted by the staff.
Right, but then,
Okay.
then we get at it.
Okay.
It's our
Drafted
report.
by the staff. And then is it our, no.
Chantal's like,
No,
you
no,
can
no.
have it.
No, I'm trying to understand where the final version rests here. Okay, and so if that's the case, I would like to be sure that differences of opinion are fairly represented and that those not be voted on by supermajority. That if you have a different opinion, that it be represented and somehow fairly, so in other words, there might be one person who has an opinion that is not representative of the rest of the group, but that doesn't, you know, I always cite the Galileo principle, was he was right and everybody else was wrong. And so there's a Galileo in this group, I'm sure.
So, Judy, what I had, the last sentence is the chair and the vice chair would work with the dissenters to ensure their viewpoint is appropriately represented. In other words, whoever was dissenting, we would work with them to make sure that they felt that it was there. And that would not, I don't think, be subject to a vote of the group, because in the end, it would just be whoever dissented who should be those folks. Now, if there was 4 different people with 4 different dissensions, then dissenting opinions or whatever, different, now I'm getting caught up. 4 different alternatives, I think, again, the goal is to provide a positive alternative. What I think we're trying to avoid is not having someone with an alternate viewpoint to say, I don't like any of it and I don't want it to be green. And
Here's what I was going to say, though, and I agree with that, Nadia. What I was going to say is that if 3 or 4 of us had 4 different opinions and were struggling hour after hour to convince the majority about a certain way to say something or an alternative, an option, we would move faster if those 4 felt that their opinion would show up in the recommendation.
Yeah.
And they don't have to keep this is Larry's concern, they don't have to keep working the group. In other words, okay, I've done the best I can do, the majority feels this way, the supermajority feels this way, but my opinion's going to show up in the report.
Yes,
And that's all, and I think that moves us along more quickly. That's my
That's
point.
exactly what's intended. Yeah.
Okay.
Go ahead, Karen.
That's a dissent.
Just to try and visualize where we're going to be when the final report decision is made, I assume we're going to be having choice A, B, whatever, and choosing one to recommend, right? We're not going to be plan A or not
So,
plan A, right?
not to get tricky, but this part is the consensus voting language. Then the next thing will be the work plan, which is where we'll also figure out what we want that final report to be. So
Well, the
we can
reason-
always have, before we move further down the path, if after we've discussed the work plan, it feels like we need to go back and tweak this one more time, we can certainly do that once we understand the work plan, but I realize that the conversation's a little out of order to answer what you're saying.
I got it. Okay,
Does that
the
make
reason I
sense?
brought it up was just the dissent conversation kind of hinges on what the decision will be.
Right.
So.
Nadia, let me reword the last paragraph, and hopefully we can then vote on it. And I'm not sure whether we've still gotten the idea of dissenters or whatever the other word is being used. In the event a unanimous consensus recommendation of the final report cannot be achieved, XPAC shall reach its decisions by a 2/3 majority vote of those present and voting at 2 successive meetings, period. The report will indicate the dissenting viewpoints, or if you want to insert some other word besides dissenting, I leave it to you guys to work out. And the rest of it would be as Nadia originally drafted it, except in the last sentence, I would change the language just a shade to ensure their viewpoints are appropriately represented, indicating that you could have more than one dissenting viewpoint.
Isn't it up to 2? Logically, you need up to 2. Does that mean you need to vote twice? Does it mean you always need to have, if the group is unanimous, there don't need to be 2 different meetings to verify it?
If it's unanimous, then they can amend this.
Up to 2, I think you meant up to 2.
You said 2 voting.
No, that's what you guys wanted.
No, what the idea was, if we couldn't get to consensus, we would try twice, and if after twice we couldn't, then we'd split it between findings and recommendations. But I think what Adina's saying is that your language seemed to indicate we will vote twice
Yes,
to
yeah,
certify everything.
That was the intent of.
Right, it shouldn't be a problem.
Fine. It wasn't my line. So you did adopt that 2/3 of those present and voting, period.
Okay. Okay, go ahead.
To Judy's point, do we want to remove the if consensus can't be achieved so that we include the dissenting viewpoints regardless?
Well, if consensus can't be achieved, then there are dissenting viewpoints. I think if there's consensus, that means it would have been unanimity at the point, I guess. Right?
Oh, consensus is unanimous.
Well,
I
I
thought
see
Judy
what
was
you're
saying
saying,
even if
yeah.
one person disagreed, their comment would be included. That's
right.
okay,
That was
yeah.
my intent.
Okay, so if not if a unanimous decision can't be achieved, how's that, right? Okay. Did you catch that, Chantal? Okay, it's the last paragraph, second to last sentence. If consensus, instead of if consensus, it would be unanimous. If a unanimous decision can't.
But I can see the
recommended.
situation where someone says, I agree with it, this is good enough, but there's some fine points I want to make and describe what would make it even better. I think the final report is good enough and I support it, but X, Y, Z would make it even better. So even it could be unanimous and still have dissenting views.
I think the goal, so as much as we can move forward, I think we'd need to move forward. Tweaking, if we could even just get to that many people agreeing to something, I think we've already won a lot. We can always add extra information afterwards. So I don't know if we want to, because if we make it so that everybody then adds but you know what it would have made it awesome, and everybody gets the list of that, then we've got to go through everybody approving that. So it opens up a different issue. Does that make sense?
Is that part of the final report, or are the dissensions an appendix onto the final report, and we're just voting on the core of the final report?
I don't know. How would you see it working?
I would think that you would
open.
vote on the final report, and then if anyone else wants to add their PS onto it, that would be outside of the vote. Otherwise,
But then you're allowing one person to have their own PS in there, and I think we want to make sure that the report recommends the work of the group. That would be my thought. Go ahead.
From a simplicity standpoint, you'd be voting on the report, and if there's any additional information that people want to raise or additional arguments, they can raise that outside the report, and we don't have to do iteration after iteration. Because we are going to be going through and iterating, and it's not like everybody can write the final report themselves. When you're writing a group report, you never get it exactly the way you want it, and there may be significant points that people want to raise.
Okay.
Well, it would be great if we all agreed that the final report represented every single minutia point of view. It's unlikely, and so because we have free speech, everyone here as an individual can still go to that meeting and say what you want to say.
Okay. So we have the final motion. So Chantal, there's really no way to put this up on the screen? Okay, if I could request maybe in the future if we can make sure that we always have that, because I think it's really hard to vote on these motions without having anything visual. Okay, well, but I think in order to do that, we probably need the screen. So if we could, is it possible to make that for next time? Okay, great. Okay, so, all right, so we have the motion and we have the seconder, and I think it's been amended appropriately. Does anyone need me to read it back? Because if so, Chantal will have to read. Okay.
Just that last paragraph. In the event a unanimous consensus recommendation for the final report cannot be achieved, the procedures outlined in sections 4A to C will be applied to a maximum of 2 successive meetings. And then the XPAC shall reach its decision by a 2/3 majority vote of those present and voting, period. Then go on, the report will indicate the dissenting viewpoints, or not dissenting, but what's your wording, Judy?
Concerns.
Dissenting concerns. Concerns.
Thank you, Larry.
Well, I don't know, what's a concern if I vote, this is concern, well, all right.
So hold on, just to correct, I think the last sentence is, if unanimity can't be achieved, the report will indicate the dissenting viewpoints, or either findings or dissenting recommendations.
Right.
The chair and vice chair would work with the dissenters to ensure their viewpoints are appropriately represented. Is that correct?
Right.
Okay. Well, we deleted the 4th paragraph, that was terrible. I'm sorry about that. It slipped through. Okay, are we ready to vote? All in favor of the motion, say aye. Aye. Anyone say nay? That passes unanimously. No abstentions? No abstentions, okay. Sorry, people, I know this seems very tedious, but part of the big concern here was to just make sure that we sort of set the tone of how the XCAP will work, so I appreciate your patience for what seems like very boring stuff. Okay, so 4B was about phone meeting participation. The real problem with the phone meeting participation that Chantal discussed last time is that it requires a lot of organization in terms of if you're like in London, then someone has to be able to go to your hotel room in London, yada, yada. So wanted to see if how the group felt about not having any phone meeting participation to be able to make that move faster and have easier coordination. So you have to basically make it to a meeting, and if you can't, you can always use your DVR. Thoughts on that? Larry, your mic is on. Did you want to say something? Or?
Well, I would move that we not allow phone participation.
Tony seconds.
How many meetings are we going to have during the holiday period between mid-November and January 1st?
That is part of a doodle poll that will be coming afterwards. I think the goal from a schedule perspective was to try to have 2 meetings a month, but I'm not sure based on the doodle poll that will work. So it looked like we might only be able to have 1 November meeting unless we can really, there was 3 people who didn't respond, so unless those people somehow tipped the numbers. And then in February, it's 2, but all before the 18th of December.
Okay, well, I support this from January forward, but a lot of our vacation plans are already made.
Also, what is the definition of what is the definition of an excused absence? Because there were, okay.
Well, let me speak to my motion. It's just a matter of practicality. The procedures to set it up are onerous, and if you've ever listened to any of the city council meetings where a council member calls in, the phone person on the phone in that discussion, I think this brings the discussion to a dead halt because there's a long delay, and sometimes the whole system breaks down, and you've got to give all this advance notice. I don't think it's worth it. We have a 14-member committee, and we ought to be able to get 10, 11, 12, 13 people at each and every meeting, and you're not expected to necessarily be at every meeting, so why impose all this obligation, this difficulty on us?
And the question I was asking was basically to make sure that people weren't getting accidentally booted because they had previous vacation plans, which it sounds like that is not the case.
I have a comment. So I think it's important, like, how many minimum people could attend, right? If it's vacation and it's not like you're not attending, it's not an important thing, but it's like minimum, maybe we should decide how many people should.
I think we have in here already that the minimum quorum would be 8 people.
Okay, I think that's fine.
Okay. Dave?
Just to Carrie's point, I don't think we're really voting anyway until the new year, so it's a lot of information, and we can always get that. So it doesn't seem that important before January anyway.
Good point.
Okay, I'm going to try to move us along so we can get to the next work plan because we're already very over. All in favor of accepting Larry's motion to not permit participation by phone, say aye. Aye. Anyone say nay? Any abstentions? Great. Another unanimous vote. Okay, and so the next item on the agenda is we have 5 minutes to talk about our meeting agenda, which is really about the doodle poll and what's going forward. The next item discusses the work plan. And again, the attempt was to try to, we're looking to try to have 2 meetings a month. But Chantal, I see you trying to say something. Go ahead. Oh, sorry. Thank you. I thought we did public comment at the beginning. Yeah, sorry, we missed item 4C. Were there any other amendments to the guiding principles? I did miss that. Okay, sorry about that. Seeing none. Okay, now number 5, meeting schedule.
When did, I'm sure I did, I'm one of the 3 or 4 that didn't respond. I'm guilty. Can you tell me the date you sent it out, and I'll try to respond.
I'm just going to
You
give
sent
an
it to me again?
overview now.
Thank you, but I'll find it.
I can give an overview right now. Yeah, so the idea is trying to set your upcoming meeting schedule, and part of that goal is to set your quote-unquote regular meeting, as opposed to our meetings, which work based off date, but will all be considered special meetings until we have a regular day and time in which your meetings are scheduled. So based off of the doodle poll with the group, the meeting days that are possible are November 13th from 4 to 6 p.m. 11 of you could do that. And 10 of you could do from 5 to 7 p.m. on that same day, November 13th. So essentially you guys are all good, essentially between 4 and 7. On December 4th, 10 of you said that 4 to 6 p.m. work, and 8 of you said from 5 to 7 p.m. could work. On December 18th, from 4 to 6 p.m., it was 12 people who said they could do that day and time, and from 5 to 7 p.m., it was 11 people. And on Thursday, December 19th, it was 11 people who said they could do 4 to 6, and 10 people who said they could do 5 to 7. So in general, it looks like, to your previous question of does 4 to 6 work better or 5 to 7, it seems like you at least always have one extra person that can do 4 to 6 better than 5 to 7. And then for these dates, Wednesdays seem to be a pretty good day for you. And then let me see if there's a set cadence of those. So that looks like it's, for December, it's the 1st and 3rd Wednesday of the month. For November, it's the 2nd Wednesday of the month. So just
November's an odd month anyway, because I think it's the only one that where we were able to get enough was just the one date, right?
yes, you have a lot of holidays in November that throw the whole calendar off, and Thanksgiving's on a weird week this year. So those dates again were November 13th, December 4th, December 18th, or December 19th. Or.
That one's
Yeah,
close.
because I don't think you want to meet Wednesday and Thursday. I know you love each other, but that's a lot.
Adina, go ahead.
Yeah, I know that every individual has different conflicts and challenges, but it seems problematic to schedule on top of PTC, given that active community members may have other interests in agenda items that are before PTC and might want to come in addition to those serving on PTC. So I would recommend as a policy matter to not schedule on, like scheduling adjacent to PTC like 4 to 6 seems reasonable, but like scheduling on top of it seems, or even 4 to 7 with a short walk seems reasonable, but scheduling on top of PTC seems like a bad idea.
And PTC, can you remind us what the schedule is again, Carrie?
Yes, for the remainder of this year, tonight at 6 p.m., 11:13 and 12:11. Those are our only conflicts in 2019. And as far as the doodle poll goes, that's only the November 13th meeting, which is in question. So that this seems workable from the PTC perspective. Yeah, we're second and fourth Wednesdays, so if we wanted to do Wednesdays with this group, maybe first and third or something?
Either first and third or the earlier time on that day.
Okay. Okay, so if the group is okay, so that means you would not be able to do Wednesday, the 13th. You could do from 4 to 6, but not from 5 to 7. Okay.
But I'm not asking everyone to schedule around.
No,
we've
but
got
it's not
many
about
people,
you,
yeah.
it's about the city's planning and transportation commission.
Which is a great point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if there's going to be a motion today, I'm not encouraging one way or the other, but I would encourage you to vote for a day and a time. So first and third Wednesdays from 4 to 6 p.m. will be the XCAP meeting times. We can always cancel, we can always make a special meeting, but that would be the type of thing we would want to establish today. So we don't have to pick specific dates today.
And for the month of December, how does that works out well? Because
That's
what we have.
exactly the first and
Okay,
third.
great. So I will move the first and third Wednesday of each of the month from 4 to 6 p.m. to be our regular meetings. Do I have a second? Thank you. Yes. Okay. All in favor? Aye. Any nays? Any abstentions? Thank you. Okay, well, that passes unanimously. Thank you. Okay.
But they're obviously, first and thirds, we're not going to be here. I mean, right? So can we get the excluded first and thirds? So it's pretty clear.
The month of November is an exclusion for your first and third. So I will upload on the website. Your next meeting day will be a special meeting on November 13th. So your regular meetings for the month of November are all canceled, and you'll have a special meeting.
So it's these three that we have agreed on.
You'll have a special meeting on November 13th is your next meeting. And then you'll pick up your regular meeting schedule in the month of December, which would be December 4th and December 18th.
And then that's just for 2019.
Well, your first and third will continue in 2020.
Is the 13th, is that the 4 o'clock time?
Yeah.
They're all 4 to 6. That's what you just voted on.
It seems to be working. I mean, we're getting a lot of
We've had a
people
lot of
here.
people, yeah.
It seems to be working.
And as we get better about agenda times, they also won't go so long, so.
So I'll upload these dates to the website.
Great. Okay. Anyone have public comment on our meeting schedule? I'm so sorry. I know, thank you. Before the vote, I just didn't think they were, okay. My apologies. I'm going out of order, but, okay. So we're on to number 6, the XCAP work plan. This was the one that I unfortunately got out very late, so that was my fault. My apologies to everybody. I tried to throw something together again so that you guys would have something to throw darts at. And the idea is to, so for those of you in the audience, hold on, let me find the 10,000 papers I have. The cover is this. The PowerPoint presentation? Yep. And so you can have a quick read through. The general concept is that in order to make it to our tight timeline of April 30th of 2020, that it would probably be good for us to review all of the work that's been done to date. And for those of you who've been following along, this has been going on for a long while, but most probably got, quote, interesting once Measure B passed at the end of 2016, so really 2017. And so the concept would be that part of sort of transportation best practices is to define what's called do a needs assessment and problem definition. And what that means is to kind of make sure we all agree that what the problem is in a simple sentence. And it's not just we need a grade separation, it's something that attempts to define the problem that we're trying to solve and recognizing that we all agree that that is a problem. So for example, we've had members of the community say, we don't think that it's going to be any problem if Caltrain comes. We don't need any grade separations. And so part of what the group would have to say is, actually, we think that we need to have grade separations and what those will look like. So that's sort of the gist of it. The second orange thing, which says establish criteria to measure success, the idea behind that is that the council has given us sort of high-level criteria, but typically what's done is that you take things like comp plan policies and those sort of things which are very specific and try to create goals around that. So for example, the council says they're concerned about noise, but I, for example, pulled up the comp plan, and the comp plan has this handy map that actually has the current decibel level of all noise corridors in the city. So an example of a measurable criteria would be to say, if we select a grade separation, we don't go over the decibel levels of X that are already the standard of the city in certain places. That's sort of the thought of that. The idea would be we would work to sort of go through those and then bring those to City Council at our the tentative December 9th City Council check-in, where we would sort of show Council, hey, this is what we've done, and make sure that they give us the blessing, and we would continue. The way I plan, or the way I was suggesting that we could get to that crazy schedule is you guys doing some homework, and by you guys I mean XCAP, not the audience. And so the concept here is that we have a lot of domain expertise, and we have a lot of people who are interested in specific topics. And so what I was hoping to do is have us choose to be on groups of maybe 2 and 3 on specific topics like safety, which could include fire, police, and means restrictions, water, so that could be creeks, groundwater, pumping, PAUSD, which Barbara already said that if we all agree that this is something that the group would like to go with, that she'd be happy to be on that group. One about Caltrain, so both the technical issues and the electrification issues. And the point of this group would not be to make recommendations and come back. It's not sort of a typical subcommittee. The real idea here is that a lot of questions have been developed and there's been a lot of material. And so by being on a group, your group would agree to take on, for example, the creeks issue, read up everything that the city has ever written about creeks with relation to the grade separations, and try to develop your best list of questions to help frame what we're trying to understand. That way we could turn that over to either the city staff or the consultants or the creek people, whoever we identify as the right group, to be able to say, in order for us to be able to make a decision, these are the things that we really need answered. And so it's a way to really guide, to echo back to the community all of the concerns that we've already heard, to review the work that's been done and try to put it together in one place. And the idea would be that once we turn over these reports to the appropriate folks who will be doing them, that we would actually get a complete written report rather than, traffic was discussed in 3 pages of PowerPoint on day whatever. I mean, what I'm sort of thinking about is that the final report would have the recommendations, but would also include in the back an appendix of the different topics that we would choose today. And the idea being that you would have an entire report that explains, well, what were the assumptions that we had about the creeks at the time, or what were the assumptions that we had about police and fire, such that if something doesn't get executed right away, then in 5 years, if someone were to pick up this report and go back and read it, they could understand why we as a group decided to make this decision. So that was sort of at a high level the idea. I wanted to hear from you guys. I know I tried to ask you guys to read it ahead of time, but it was a very tight schedule. So yes, Judy.
I did read it ahead of time. So first of all, I might not have done the doodle poll, but I did read this. Thank you for doing this. A lot of work and a lot of thought went into it, so thank you very much. The first thing I would like to suggest is that we have some form that we use to plug in the information we're all going to go after, so that it can be easily translated into something that's organized in some template kind of a form. Okay, that would be the first thing. And also, then I just have a couple of comments, if I may. All right. So, is there any estimate of when we would be doing the recommendations? Is it April, or what is it?
So there's a second attachment, which was an Excel spreadsheet, which was my attempt to lay out sort of
This one.
This is the color-coded
one,
one?
yeah.
Yep. Yes,
Right,
the schedule.
so-
So pink is basically ongoing background stuff, so we would, you'll see October, November has a lot of pink. I don't have anything later, but that's really, that will be filled in. So for example, once we all gather our questions on the creeks, the idea would be at some point to invite an expert from the creek people, whoever they are, to come and explain, we could sort of go through questions, but we'd already have our
Okay.
pre-thought of questions.
Okay.
I did want to think about, and we could take this offline afterwards, but I know you had mentioned to Chantal kind of doing something separate for the business community, and I wanted to
Well-
think about how to incorporate that into.
Yeah, I have some comments
this.
on that.
Great.
Coming up.
Suspect.
Okay, thank you for that. So I'd like to start with page 3. I don't think we need to flagellate ourselves with the messy process business. I think we should just be, this is process. In fact, it's Palo Alto process. I just think we should be happy that we're all spending our time doing this, and I don't think it's necessary to say it's a messy process. The second bullet point, improved understanding of Alma's relationship, and I would add El Camino, because you can't even discuss Churchill without discussing El Camino. And then, of course, eventually we will get to Palo Alto Avenue. So I would include El Camino, please. Down on the 4th bullet point, it says cookie cutter options are hard without design exemptions or loosening.
Loosening, I had corrected that.
Loosening?
yeah.
Okay, wasn't sure.
Yep.
I thought it was losing, actually. Okay.
No, loosening.
Loosening, thank you. Down 3 bullet points up.
Sorry.
Ex-CAP members report. Neighbors know little to nothing, I would say, and the business community.
Okay.
And then, this is just because I have a degree in communications, I'm sorry.
I'm
The
gonna
next
use
to the
that.
last bullet, engaged is twice. Engaged
Yes.
members are engaged?
They are super engaged.
They're
That's
super
how engaged they are.
Okay. But not the business community. They're not engaged.
Okay.
Not yet. You could say not yet. I'd be positive about that. And then on the problem definition and criteria, page 5, under the needs assessment, which is the left box, the top one, says expected outcomes must be needed, achievable, and specific. Not to be argumentative, but I don't think needed and achievable are defined. And I think we're going to spend a lot of time arguing about what's needed and what's not needed, what's achievable and what's not achievable. And it would be better if we came to some consensus about what do we need? Everybody thinks that things are needed. And so if need is modified by achievable, maybe that's a conversation that we should have, because that's going to be really getting down to the real decision points about whether you do it one way or another way. You might want something and it's completely unachievable.
So how about we just strike that whole line, just to
Okay.
be, since it's not
I like
clear.
specific. I like that one.
I have a
like that
feeling
one.
it's going to be specific.
All right. And then the next page, on the right-hand box, under finalize, evaluation, and documentation, and this was where I mentioned it very early in our meeting, if complete consensus is not possible, describe minority concerns. Again, I want to be sure that it's the people who have those concerns who get to say what they are.
Sure. Hopefully that's now that that's part of the guiding principles, that's
right.
okay.
That's
Great, yeah.
right.
This was, again, just.
Right.
Yeah.
And then to the page 8, where you were just describing these ad hoc groups,
Mhm.
I don't see how business or business impacts fits into any of these groups
Right.
very well. I think they fit into all of them in some way, but my concern is that by not calling out the fact that business is going to be impacted by whatever we do, we're going to miss their input, and I would recommend that you and we rethink these groups to maybe not have a separate business group, but in each one of these maybe take up the issue of impacts on business, or have, I just think all of them are going to impact business, so rather than having a separate, maybe I'm
So-
just one way of looking at it.
No, so if I could just offer some feedback, what I was thinking, so the more I thought about it is obviously business fits into all of these categories. They care
In
about
some
water,
way.
police, and fire.
Right.
But the very specific business thing that I thought of was kind of the construction impacts. That's like, if you're shutting down roads, the businesses are caring, like, can customers get to me? So maybe a suggested ad hoc group would be thinking about, and one could argue that this is outside of the scope of the group, right? We're supposed to just make recommendations about grade separations. Having to also think ahead about what construction mitigations you might want is hard. And so that's why I didn't include anything, but I'm totally open to hearing
Well, I think,
how we can think
I think
about
it fits under, what you were just describing fits under traffic in some
Yeah.
ways.
Mhm.
So, property impacts, what happens to town and country when, I think, I would like maybe you to think about that, because you've thought very hard about this, but I would say that, except for maybe the school district, every one of these others, there are going to be concerns and impacts on business, and it would be great to have business help solve these issues during the conversations, rather than be reactive.
Go ahead, Adina.
Yeah, so I had 3 questions, but now I have 4 questions. So, based on what Judy just said about the concerns of business, does it make sense? So, like business is a different kind of axis, because some of the things that businesses are concerned about, like, are about traffic and are about property impacts and so on. So I think you're saying 2 things. One is to make sure that the business concerns about these things are represented, and the other is that there might be some other things that are not on this list that are important to businesses. So does it make sense to keep this list open and have Judy connect back with the business constituency and say, hey, are we missing something that's really important that is of interest to businesses? Is that the way to address that concern? Because business is a different axis than these things, right? Because schools are also concerned about safety and property impacts and so on. It's not, we don't have an extra category for businesses and schools. So some of it is like how are businesses concerns about, yeah. Yeah.
Question for the city manager. So at City Council on Monday night, there was a presentation done by the new communications person about the kind of engagement. Is it possible that, since I came in late and I missed part of the presentation, was there anything that addressed the businesses specifically? And is there a special part of that program that might address some of the things that we're discussing here?
Not directly. It was really an overview of kind of looking at phases, and in particular, the roll out from where we are really starting after the first of the year to a more robust, comprehensive town halls and other engagement processes. Business would certainly be a part of that, but it wasn't called out specifically. So we do, based on the feedback we got on Monday, our plan is to come back with a more specific work plan in the upcoming weeks.
So an ad hoc committee isn't a Brown acted group. And so I would suggest that maybe we get an expert in each subject. For example, Valley Water. I know those people, they're a member of the chamber. And so maybe somebody from Valley Water would participate in the one word about water. So I think it's possible, if that's okay with the city, to have somebody there who's got the expertise from the business side to work in that group or work on the questions or whatever it is that group is doing, if that would be okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the other questions that I had were, what are, are these being looked at for everything in total, or is there like a matrix of per alternative? Like, what are the property impacts per alternative? What are the safety and water impacts per alternative?
It's all open for discussion. I think the idea was Again, this group is not the experts on that topic. They're just the experts on asking the questions. So the idea would be that they apply that to all of the alternatives that we have and then think about, you know, how it would apply in each case.
Yep.
And if we have also agendized for a little bit after this, looking at any new alternatives and how the group wants to treat those alternatives. And so I covered that process.
Okay, you're answering a question that I didn't ask, and I think you answered the question that I did ask.
Sorry,
So the
thank
other,
you.
The other things are, like, what are the relationships between these topics and the council's criteria? Yeah.
It's different. So this is these topics are meant to be fleshing out of all of the questions we've had and trying to bucket them. Different than the part of the criteria discussion, which if the group feels like we want to be able to come up with measurable criteria, then that will be included as what we start to do at a different meeting, and we'll figure out how to do that.
Okay, and with extreme apologies, that I just remembered another question. So once we have these questions, will staff help to collate all the information that is on the shelf to answer the questions? Is that the point of this exercise, that like we, the citizens, will say, here's the questions, and there's so much information on the shelf, and staff will help to assemble the answers that the city has already piled up over these many years into answering the questions? Is that the concept?
That would be the concept, yes.
Okay.
So I'd like to weigh in on that. Be quite honest, I'm struggling a little bit for how these will work myself. Maybe using the example of water is probably a good example. And I could certainly see, as was suggested, asking the water district to participate in a couple of meetings, perhaps, in which there would be a deep dive at looking at each of the options that we're currently talking about and what issues they raise from that perspective. And the water district would certainly be one. Let's see. The Safe Palo Alto groundwater would also want to participate in that very focused discussion, again, as a way of examining or considering each one of the options from the specific perspective of the topics that are described here. Quite frankly, I'm not sure how much farther you could go beyond that, because as we have gone through this discussion a few times, whether it's the water district, Caltrain, school district, or any other agency with areas of responsibility, they're going to be limited, quite frankly, in their reactions. I mean, they'll certainly give you a perspective on what the issues are, but they're not going to tell you what works and what doesn't. Flat out. They will not tell you what works and what doesn't. The best you could probably hope for is the description of the process they would go through in order to answer your question. And I think we've seen that enough. So given that, it may be useful to try to articulate exactly how each of these ad hoc groups would work, because definitely a deep dive on any one of these topics could be very fruitful, just for the purpose of understanding what the issues are. I would just set the expectation not much further than that.
I think what I was proposing was, we've had a lot of those discussions and a lot of meetings, but the way it's worked up until this point is that you either have to go through and watch each different meeting, and if you're looking back at 2017, there's actually some transcripts you can read, but there isn't, for example, a synopsis of this is where we are with creeks, this is where we are with water. We have an occasional letter from, for example, the water district, but not something that's an entire, you know, if you had a final report that had a water section, you could say, okay, well, here was the report we got from the creeks, this is what we got about groundwater, this is what we got about pumping. And so what Larry and I discussed was that we really are going to have some sort of formal, either laying out what the process would be based on the framework of what the XCAP is asking for to be able to make their decisions, but have something per topic heading, so we can say, okay, on Caltrain, these are the assumptions that we're working with. On safety, these are the assumptions that we heard. But something that is more than just on traffic, refer to the slide number, whatever on the following presentations, because it's too difficult for that to be, it has to be collated in a way that is readable. And so the idea of the ad hoc group is to look at everything that's been reviewed, see what other questions have not been answered by whatever has been produced to date, and then recommend, if we're going to have a report on water, we saw these letters, but we're missing the following things, or could we request the following things, or could you outlay the following processes so we understand further? That would be the concept. If the group thinks so. Yeah, Dave. But Adina, were you
Yeah, but
finished?
the last thing is, were you thinking in terms of criteria that one of the things that we might wind up being recommending to council is changes to the criteria that they set, where we like go through this entire process, and somebody realized, wow, here's this other thing that's really important. We would recommend to council that they modify or add a criterion.
So yeah, the idea would be to go through the existing, like, for example, the comp plan, as it turns out, has a whole bunch of stuff in it about this sort of stuff. And so, at least in my working on this, there's never been a moment where the entire comp plan policies have been put against the council criteria. And so even just the exercise of someone going through and saying, okay, what's in the comp plan relevant to the criteria that's already been presented would be a useful exercise. So if you're on the policy committee, then that would be.
Right. So let me just give an example to make sure that I understand, and then maybe staff might want to understand this too. So like on the Caltrain, maybe, like if I was volunteering to do that one, then to be able to ask the question, you know, what are the potential Caltrain service scenarios based on the business plan for 2040? And I would ask that question, and then a staff person would figure out that this is in the Caltrain business plan service vision presentation and would assemble it in the answers. So we wouldn't do the homework. We would ask, like, what is the groundwater pumping need, and somebody from staff would then go to the report that was done in 2015 and pull it out and do it. We wouldn't have to find the thing from 2015.
Correct, but I will agree, I will admit that I have done this for too long, so I have actually already started a library of the documents that each group would probably need as a way to sort of get the work going, because I sort of know where the letter from the creek is, and I know where the siphon picture is, and so I've kind of pulled that all together. But for those, and I'm looking at you, Adina, who've done this for a little bit longer, there may be other documents that we missed, so going through that list and trying to remember what other, oh, there's also this other Caltrain presentation where this one thing is in there would be helpful. But to the extent that we could help staff and say, these are the documents, if I'm a safety person, these are the, you know, documents that we have from, you know, Project Safety Net that I would include, then that's also part of it, would be sort of recommending what else should be included. So Dave and then Tony.
Two questions. One is,
Before you, I just want to make it clear, I don't want everyone to feel like you have to ask me questions about this. This is all up for discussion, so this is not just, I want to know how you guys feel about what's presented. If it doesn't feel good or doesn't jive, then that's the point of this. So it's not like, do you want this or do you want that? It's not what I want. It's what we all want as a group. So I just want to really encourage you to, you know, play with it. It's like a big thing of Play-Doh.
my questions are, first, how does the ad hoc group and what those groups have to deliver relative to the schedule that we proposed here? Like, for instance, I don't know, property impacts is sitting in the, well, there's only one bar now in November, not two. So do we then have, those that are scheduled in November, will we only have between now and November 13th to kind of put something together that would be talked about or presented at that meeting?
And actually, your page 9 says that we do the rubrics by our last November meeting, which is...
Yes, which is, it presents a problem now that we don't have November meetings. So I didn't have the results of the doodle poll, so this was the best I had when we did it. It presents a, I guess, if the group agrees that that's what we need to do, then we'll need to figure out what is the most effective way to do that. If it turns out that we can't make it to December 9th by that point, then part of it will be potentially going to council at the following meeting, if that's likely, so it gives us enough time to see. I mean, we'll have to work with the council schedule and figure out what we can do, but I appreciate that it's constrained. I think the most immediate lift here from the XCAP members, if we agree that we want to do these ad hoc groups, is basically breaking up into the groups. And what I sort of envisioned was folks raising their hand saying, yes, I would like to be on this group or the other group, and then we would kind of go take those offline, because that would be less than a majority. It would be 2 or 3 people. But I hear you, Judy, and I don't really know how to reconcile that schedule, but we'll work on it. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. And Dave. Yeah, we have a December 4th meeting, but it's still only 2 meetings before we go to council, so go ahead, Tony.
Oh, I had one more
question.
question.
Sorry,
if I
Dave, yeah.
could. It was regarding the new ideas. This second line item, how do we want to vet new ideas and iterations? I'm very curious about that process. Some things that I can think of are like, is there a way to not spend time going over stuff that's been gone over before? There'll be some naive, probably, suggestions potentially that we'd want to figure out how we would want to address a little bit. There could be some potential learning that we want to push out to people who want to submit. There's a ton of data there. Yeah, it's a lot, but it would be worthwhile for someone who wants to suggest something to look through that and learn a lot about it before they put up some idea. There could be a lot of ideas. How do we choose which ones that we would bring to the meeting and to discuss? And then a process potentially to see if we want to accept something for further discussion later. So I'm just kind of curious about all that, and when would we talk about that?
Yep, I hear you. Tony and then In Young.
So this is a question about the criteria and the council adopted criteria. I think my opinion is they're good criteria, but they need to have more bullets and more explanations. But I noticed in these criteria there's a cost implication implied in many of these notes, but it's not clear about what that cost is, and I think we need to start drilling into costs and what can we afford, because that's going to determine what we choose or what we don't choose otherwise. And and in my business, what we do is we go to a contractor who actually is building the thing and can tell you a really good, straight, honest, not honest, but but clear picture of what it's going to cost. Whereas if I, as a consultant, give that cost, it's fudged. We add on 30% to it because you want to be safe. And delays too, yeah. So cost is a big, important factor of how we're going to decide, and it should be further ahead than where we are. Yeah, that's.
In Young?
Okay, so ad hoc groups, can we call it something else, advisory group, expert group or something? And if it's that, I think the whole idea is you divide and conquer, right?
Yeah, so the reason, the nomenclature is very specific. So if it was a subcommittee, for example, then the subcommittee would have to report back to the committee, and there's a whole process. So the ad hoc group is basically saying, this is not a formal committee, they're not making formal recommendations. We're just breaking into groups based on this subject heading, doing these things.
Right.
Yeah, work groups, we could pick a different name, but the point is not to make it a subcommittee, because that adds additional layers of sausage.
So I think ad hoc group, it could appear and disappear, or you can add to this meeting and next meeting. I think it's more meaningful if this is advisory group or whatever that you just said, working group, and then if somebody has a question about water, you can just go to this person instead of bunch of us making comments, and which doesn't mean anything, because that's sort of, and if we want to add about question about the council approved criteria, that should be another group that manage that particular thing, right? So, so that's my comment. So I think the goal of this ad hoc group or working group is to have an expert knowledge and be able to answer questions, or if there is answer needed to investigate, they follow up instead of Nadia doing it and Chantar doing it all the time, or we punt it into, ACOM, right? So, is that clear? Is that the intent?
Yeah, I think that makes sense. So I think in order to move the discussion along, what I'll ask is, is everyone okay with the general direction, being that we'll agree on a needs assessment and problem statement, and that we'll work on going through existing policies to be able to develop more measurable criteria, and we'll agree to break into work groups based on subject headings. And if that's the general, if we want to take I have to go to the public for comment, but if we want to take a quick vote on that, then we can then, we can talk offline, and you can tell me which group you'd be interested in, which two. Yeah.
I did want to comment on the problem statement. We did have a problem
I know.
statement, and we'll need
This
to
is-
dredge
this is an
that
easy
out.
one.
Yes, at least as a starting point.
Right, yeah. Yeah, it's a 2017, but we haven't seen it in a while, so I thought we'd dust it off and bring it back out. Yeah. Okay, so the way the agenda's set up, we have that, then we have the, we've kind of merged, actually, I noticed in our discussion, we've merged 6A and 6B. And then 6C includes, hold on, work plan including. So 6A was really also about discussing the new alternatives piece. So Dave, you raised that issue. So I wanted to hear from the group. The challenge, of course, with hearing any new ideas is that there have been many things that have been discussed. Some of them were discussed a long time ago. And even if this group agrees that there's some idea that we think is really compelling, the way the process has to work is we all then have to agree. We would make a recommendation to council. I would then take that when I do a council update and tell the council what that is. And if there was one in particular that we liked, maybe we would invite that person to speak at that meeting. But ultimately, if the council then decided that new idea or iteration warranted spending money on it, they decide. So this is just us agreeing to recommend, but we really have to be sure that we understand that recommending an alternative costs money. And so that is sort of the key thing here. We've had a few, at least 2 or 3, I think, different iterations come forth. And because we don't have yet an email did everyone get, there was one that was sent by one of the neighbors in Southgate, for example. Did everyone on the XCAP receive that? Okay. Okay. So hopefully when we do get a single email that comes in from that, we'll be able to filter those. But there was at least one, and then I know Tony has brought up a different one at another point. So I wanted to hear from the group. What do you guys think about the new alternatives? How do you feel about how we should go about them, and what are your thoughts on that?
First, you kind of touched on it a little bit. The first one for me is the submission process. So we talked about potentially like an email or something, but then now it's how do we filter that and discuss it, and what do we do with all this stuff that we get? But then also, sorry. What?
I'm just confused about where we are in the agenda. Is this part of the work?
Oh, this is A.
Took them out of it. We've kind of, because it's all sort of meshed together. So this is 6A. Consider whether XCAP should review new alternatives or alternatives previously discarded.
But does this mean that we already approved the work plan, or we deferred approval of the work plan?
It's part of it. So the problem is the way I wrote this agenda, which I'm learning the hard way. So it's 6A, B, and C are basically have merged into one conversation. So that's where we are. My apologies.
So to continue on a little bit, and even sort of like pre-submission too, right? I talked a little about before. Is there a way to kind of educate the folks that haven't been around for 2 years and looking through this stuff to be able to get their thinking, fine-tune their thinking and refine it a little bit so that when it gets to us, it has, quite frankly, the best chance of either passing or they should decide themselves, like, oh, it's been done before. So it's like pre-submission and then submission, and then we can kind of talk about the next step, which is kind of like us talking about it and voting. But that could be a place to start, is the pre-submission and submission process.
Yeah, I would say we could have an ad hoc that would help. We think there's some raw ideas that you could have 2 or 3 people just work with them and polish it up enough and then publish it. And if there's a significant number of people that want to investigate it more, then we would say, yes, we want to look into this. If it doesn't have traction, it doesn't have traction. Because the other thing I'm worried about is going off on dirt roads and wasting our time. But also there are some good solutions. The one from Southgate I thought was very good.
So this question about other options, I'm not so sure it's so much other options as refining the existing options to fit Palo Alto. Our DNA is not generic. And what we expect from consultants is to give us the generic one so we know it works or how it works. And then we have to fit it. I think our committee has to fit it to Palo Alto. a good example is the Embarcadero and Alma. Yeah, that's a good example of many different kinds of situations that can fit Palo Alto better. But we also have to look at costs. And so we here, I think, have to balance this issue of costs and what fits Palo Alto. Our DNA is Baylands and the foothills. I mean, that's our DNA. We need more landscape in these proposals that come along. That's how it'll fit Palo Alto better. So I think our role is to take the ideas that come out and see how we can put Palo Alto's DNA into it.
So maybe just to comment on that, I do think there may be two categories of issues that we're talking about. One is the refinement, and the other might be new concepts. And at the risk of a sore point here, the design workshop would be a way to deal with the refinement piece, probably more so than to get a whole lot of work done on entirely new ideas. On the new ideas side, I think part of what you will want to consider is how to get, we'll call it the engineering perspective on the issues early on as well. Just not as a go, no-go, but as a part of the thinking as to what to spend more time on. So, that's one of the just factors that I think we can certainly support that pre-submittal process if you come up with an informal way to do that.
And I'm going to let you speak, and then I want to go to the public because they've been waiting super patiently.
So with the clarifying the two things about the pre-submittal, one is part of that is verifying whether this is something that has been proposed before and rejected for a reason, and if so, what was that reason? And is there a different process of, like, and it could be that one of those reasons is it's not physically possible. The laws of physics preclude it, and then, like, we can't bring it back. Is there anything that, like, we have a different process for, like, reviving things from the dead, that we're excluding things for reasons other than physical impossibility? And then the other thing is, does a pre-screen include engineering support to say, like, wow, that sounds really interesting, but that's not physically possible, so we're not going to spend any more of our time in it. So it's like, one is, does that include support for, like, immediately ruling out things that are obviously not physically possible? And then if it is something that is physically possible but was excluded, like, how do we handle things that are being revived?
Up? No, you need to speak into the mic because it's being recorded. I will just say that part of the problem is that at one point we had 34 different alternatives, and they were not, like, sort of systematically eliminated. They just sort of picked 6 and went from there. And so part of the concern is that things were eliminated but not necessarily vetted in any way. And so there's probably going to be some discussion about ideas that were included in there but not ever really considered. And so I don't know.
So it's in scope, meaning, yeah, so it is in scope, potentially bringing back things that are physically possible but were excluded for reasons that people may disagree with.
If everyone agrees, that's what I would say.
Hi, I'm Carrie Yarkin, and I'm coming to all these meetings because I feel that now you're going to reopen things that happened 2 years ago. I went to every meeting to defend a home that was on eminent domain. My sister and I own property. We own homes on Churchill. So we went through this for 2 years. And some of you ex-CAP members were not going to all those meetings defending your home. Some of us were defending our homes. So this is very dear to me. I mean, I want to keep that home. I want to have that home on Churchill. I want to be able to live there. So, you can, now you're opening things there where there were a lot of different ideas, there were a lot of different plans, and I think you have to be really sensitive to some of us who were looking at our homes being taken away for grade separation. Okay, and there were over 30 homes. I know there's at least 3 of us here that face that. There were some very trying city council meetings where people were crying, and it was very emotional. So we're sitting here okay, let's open up this. Oh, this is a good plan. I saw another plan from Southgate. I really don't think that you are being sensitive to people that have already gone through 2 years. I think at least 6 to 8 meetings I went to personally, but not being able to sleep at night because now maybe you're going to open it up and get some other ideas, and then you will have to, if you do grade separation, you will have to take those homes. I mean, that was really clear, that's gone through. So I'm just trying to make that point really clearly. I want to be able to sleep at night. I want my friends to be able to sleep at night. But once you start opening it, you're opening up that eminent domain, which was at least the 30-plus homes, and that was the first block of Churchill. So I just want you all to know how sensitive I am to that.
Are you talking about the first block on the east side?
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, actually, I thought that was interesting that Carrie said that because I think the not having property takings is such an important criteria that's pretty well accepted, I think, by almost everyone. Maybe it ends up having to be opened up, but I'm imagining that probably won't be what's happening. But I am really interested in this idea of a pre-submission process and kind of something that would provide guidance to anyone who is interested in proposing a new idea, so that they don't waste your time and that they don't waste their time, and so I just wanted to say I appreciate that, but as far as the older ideas, I would like a way personally, since I am interested in finding some alternative to closing Churchill that is as sensitive as possible to the needs of people along the fence and people on, the east side of Churchill. Is there any way of going through and understanding exactly how the details of some of the hybrid designs and the claim about how many properties it would take and what do the takings really mean? So there's takings and there's modifications to your driveway, which are we talking about? And I don't know how to find that out, and I would like to know. If anybody can tell me, that would be great.
Next.
Hi. So it's kind of been already alluded to a little bit, but I think being able to bucket some things, because I think there's some proposals that are almost more of a modification. Like it's like the viaduct, lowering it down a couple foot or something because the road could go down. It's not a new proposal. It's like almost like A prime or A double prime, like a way to capture some of those things so they're like, you don't have to do the full analysis. It's just, here's where a few other possibilities that basically the construction costs very, everything is very similar, but it is a little different because if you can lower down something, that changes the sites and some stuff. So there's a category of that kind of stuff versus almost a whole brand new idea. And I kind of think the brand new ideas, I've been going to other meetings, some of this you can shift through pretty fast from an engineering, like, hey, someone wants 60 properties. You know what? That idea is probably not going to fly. Like, there's a way to really quickly sort through some ideas and do a quick sanity check and then get to, well, there might be something. But so the bigger thing is some kind of way to, the primes, kind of A prime stuff, minors from a real, thank you.
Hi, yeah, I just wanted to point out that in our neighborhood, in Southgate, we had new neighbors who were interested in brainstorming ideas, and there's no guidance document on, for example, dimensions of how much we have to work with and how deep a train would go or how high clearances are, how wide trenches need to be, how wide street lanes need to be, et cetera. So I kind of dug through a lot of documents to try and put one of those together because I feel like anyone who does have new ideas is just foundering on the basic facts. So it would be helpful if we had some kind of document that AECOM could bless that could be useful for people who do want to brainstorm new ideas.
Okay, I'll bring it back to the group. Inyoung? Yes, if there is a new idea, Nadia, you explained to me this, that there is a new idea, then,
that expert, our ACOM, their traffic expert, they, you know, they review it, and then they think that it's viable, they recommend to the city manager.
Oh, I didn't say the or the AECom. What I said is that if this group feels that
Mhm.
there's an alternative that we think has merit,
Mhm.
and we have to discuss what we think has merit and if
Mhm.
we have to technically
Mhm.
vet it, but then we would recommend that to city council, and then city council would then ultimately decide, do we
okay.
agree that this has merit, and therefore, yes, we will spend money, and then we will ask the city manager to ask the consultants to go draw
Okay.
pictures.
Okay, but, so I would make recommendation if the somewhat technical information is sorted out, then I would make, I feel more comfortable, right? So, okay. I think I misunderstood the process then. Okay, thank you.
So, because I know we're running way over, could we take a group as a vote as to whether we agree on the general work plan in terms of needs assessment and problem statement and criteria, evaluation criteria, and breaking into working groups is the new name? And then we can talk about what exactly we want to do about the vetting of ideas. Does that work for everybody? I'm looking for nodding. Yes? Okay. So, yep, go ahead, Adina. Use your mic.
I was cross-referencing the ad hoc groups and the council criteria and Judy's comment about the particular, what businesses are concerned about and what PAUSD is concerned about. And I noted that safe routes for people walking and biking is a council criteria, and it's called out here as a thing just for PAUSD. But I think that is something that is of much broader concern for the community than just for the school district. So we would probably we might want to have an ad hoc group that focused on that safe walking and biking with school participation, as opposed to having, giving let us think about the questions about safety only to the school district.
I think what I was, so traffic I thought of as being traffic's probably not the right word. It should be circulation, and it should be multimodal circulation. And I was thinking that the PAUSD is more related to their issue of their site of their school buses and the trucks and stuff that we heard about that go to Palo, and so more related to that.
That particular property, then that should be clarified, because
Sure.
otherwise it looks.
And these are loose working groups, so if you guys overlap a little bit and you need to talk, as long as it's a group that's small enough than the thing that would violate the Brown Act, you guys can still sort of have.
Actually, that raises a really good point that I think you were about to make, which is that it might be that a couple of these groups want to meet together.
And
Much
so as long as
faster.
there are no more than 3 in a group, then that would still be 6, which is less than a quorum.
Well, but this isn't Brown Acted.
Yes, we are.
Oh, these ad hoc groups are Brown Act?
The ad hoc groups, sorry.
No, that's what I'm talking about.
Right, so
I'm
yeah.
talking about
you
the
could
ad
have-
hoc
Yes, so you could have 2.
But once you have more than 6 people, so 2 groups could meet together. But unless there is already overlap in the membership, you couldn't have 3 groups, because 3 groups would be more than 6 people, and it would create a quorum of this body.
And this is all to guard, so this is the important distinction here is, unlike a subcommittee that would be making a recommendation to the group, this is literally just a way to form questions. And so there's study group, I like study group, that makes it more fun. And if anybody is watching from home, and certainly the most engaged public members who are still here, I would love to welcome folks in the community who are interested in the different groups or might have expertise in those different groups, because we love free advice. So if you're a retired civil engineer, we're looking for you, right? If you were on the Creek JPA many years ago, now's your calling, right? So I would recommend that we as XCAP members try to pull from the folks that we know in the community. And again, it's not to provide expert information, it's just to help us get expert questions so we can then ask the best questions. I just want to keep reiterating that.
So given that, your discussion may be headed toward consolidating, at least, let's say PAUSD and traffic. I think they basically are the same issues. So you don't need to have 7 groups, as far as I can tell. As long as, again, the membership is 6 or less.
We have, do we want to go through and name the groups? Because I just threw out a suggested list, but we may, someone may decide that there's something different.
Yeah, so if you've included the bicycle and pedestrian under traffic, that should be clarified, because when I read traffic, I was reading cars, so.
How about we call that circulation
Yeah.
instead of traffic? How's
Yep.
that? And so do we want to merge PAUSD and circulation?
There's some overlap, but there's not, they have special, more criteria than just general, so I think you need to separate them.
But if it's a proper subset, then they can come up with their questions. These are going to be circulation questions these will be circulation questions that will focus on a particular property area. So it does seem like a proper subset. One thing I see on the council's list that's not on here is about the finance with feasible funding sources. Does it make sense to have a group that will ask questions about cost and funding and financing, not like we're creating original information, but that it's crystallizing the questions that can be summarized?
I just don't think we should dictate what we should be. I think the person who volunteered for this working group decide what their charters are and then be able to answer the questions. I don't think it's like we
So
have like.
They're not answering the questions, they're just collecting questions.
Collecting the questions, whatever. So
Okay,
it's
just-
not like, we should do this, and then do it, and then nobody sign up. It's like, what's the point of discussing this?
Well, I go back to my original suggestion that there be some kind of a template. So for example, everybody who's in one of these working study groups
Ad hoc study.
should consider, is there a question about cost? Is there a question about safety? I think there should be some specific questions that every group starts with, because it would be terrible to go through the whole thing and then suddenly, well, wait a minute, what's the cost? That, we didn't even think about that. So if we can come up with some specific guideline, questions that every group we suggest that they see. Is there a question about that? Environmental quality issue, are we creating, well, anyway, I think it would be helpful to have some kind of a form that we all work with, and that would be helpful.
Anybody, Dave and then Tony?
Just an overall comment. I look at the schedule, and I think it's...
Stop looking at it.
Stop looking at it?
It's wrong now at this point. No, I'm just
Well,
joking. Go
okay.
ahead, Dave. I'm totally joking.
It is wrong. And getting wronger. But I think it feels very ambitious just overall. And I had a couple thoughts there. One is, when do we think we go back to council and go, you know what, I think we need a little bit more time. The other one I was thinking of was we need to potentially overlay the consultants and their time ability to execute on some of this stuff on this. So we may need to kind of take our best next iteration of this and give it to somebody who talks to the consultants and say, hey, what do you guys think of this? And then I was just also thinking about slips in the schedule. So if we're trying to meet, like, I don't know, even simply property impacts to be delivered on this November 13th meeting, and the people working, I couldn't do it, right? So then what happens to this? And maybe we may need to potentially evaluate this after every meeting to go, hey, where are we at? Which could push things out anyway. But just some thoughts there.
I tried to think about working groups that actually were not necessarily things that the consultants had to answer specifically. So, because the ground and creek stuff, the creeks and water things, for example, is more related to what the creeks and water people's needs are and not what AECom has drawn, if that makes sense.
Yeah, but that example would be, could I get a meeting with the water people in literally 2 weeks? And get even just whoever's working on the group together, all of us to do that. Right, so that may or may not be able to happen. I mean, it's only 2 weeks away,
Yeah.
for example, yeah.
And
But the consultants would be probably more stuff in January and February.
And more pink boxes needed to be added later, with the idea being that from January on, we would populate these with the speakers of whatever the topics were. So the idea is to collect as many questions now, and then maybe when they come, we have more. In the interim, I've also called out to the groundwater folks already and some of the creek folks. Hopefully, whoever chooses that group, I'm trying to give everyone a running start to make it a little faster for everybody, but that was sort of the idea.
Yeah, and also December, November, just we're getting into like dead areas of the year.
Yeah.
So-
I mean, I think with the schedule, you want to concentrate on the spirit of the schedule, not the letter of the spirit, not the letter of the schedule, because we're not going to meet this. The schedules never are perfect. This is just kind of what we think and thought process.
So, so could we move the work plan generally, agree to ad hoc groups, and then we can, do I have a volunteer? I'm looking at you, Pat, for safety. Is that okay? Adina, I know you were interested in Caltrain, right? Do we have any volunteers for the other ones that we have listed? Barbara said she would do PAUSD, so if that's merging with traffic, we can put those two together. You can do cost if that's a, so I don't know how you do that as a, I mean, you have questions about cost, but that's, sure, if you want to lead a cost group, I'm not going to say no. And I don't want to say no, I mean, I want all of us to agree, but do we agree? So I have costs, I have Caltrain, I have PAUSD/circulation, we have public safety, and by public safety, I thought police, fire, means restriction, getting you an answer on whether Caltrain electrification already includes that fencing that you brought up, right? Yep. Public safety with safety, yes. Yeah.
Did anybody volunteer for traffic yet? That's the PS, that's the group that's doing.
So Barbara said she'd do PAUSD, but
Yeah.
that's circulation,
Right.
and I know Carrie, I think, was also interested in that as well, but.
So I think that's the one basically that impacts business, and so I'll be happy to say maybe I can go.
Okay. I'm sorry? Oh, so I'll just ask the public afterwards, once you see who's leading whichever group, you can approach them. And hopefully what we can do is try to highlight this on the website. We can say these folks are in these working groups, and then you guys can be the contacts for those working groups, right? That might be an idea. So we have safety. Anybody for water? Do I have any water people? Anybody excited about water? Anyone? Anyone? Please. Don't make me beg. Yeah, well, so again, this is not that you would be an expert or know water. This is just that you're willing to go ask water-type questions to water-type people. Yeah, Keith? Yeah.
Okay, you can put me down for the water.
Thank you, Keith. No pressure here, but pressure.
Yeah.
So property impact, so that would be both process, any potential land acquisition. It could also potentially be noise and vibration, so I've gathered, so Dave, you're interested in that one? Okay. So eminent domain is the very final step that is usually not typically used. They try to negotiate all before. It's the very last resort. And so what I was thinking was, having done things with high-speed rail, one of the things that happened, for example, in Gilroy and Morgan Hill was we organized an attorney who came and spoke and explained the entire process, what the rights of the people in the process are, how all of that works. And of course, obviously, it would depend on if there was any, I don't know, some alternatives have property impacts, most don't, but still being able to explain what that means to the community at large and explaining what all of that is. It could also be noise and vibration, although, as I think I've mentioned to a few people, I've compiled, and I can give these to Chantal, some of the grade separation things that have been done already, for example, for Menlo Park and for Burlingame, where they're slightly ahead of us, and you can see that even on noise and vibration, every report says, we ain't got nothing for you, we'll come back when you pay us more money. So the noise and vibration tends to be a thing from an engineering perspective. Until they have exactly what they're building, you only get kind of general stuff. So it's still important, and I have a lot of data stuff on it, but it may be something that, to Ed's point, we don't get necessarily answers that we find satisfactory for this group. Yeah, Tony.
So, Nadia, there's on these colored criteria, there are implications that there's some thing that we can afford, some number we can afford, but it's not transparent. It sort of goes into a black box and comes out red or orange. But sometimes it's too much, and sometimes it's almost too much. But we don't know how much.
Question to ask. That sounds like a
right, like, as
Mike.
we are compiling questions, as we are compiling questions,
Yeah.
saying what were your staff's assumptions in doing that color coding?
Right, that's your committee, Tony.
Numbering to color, tell us what we can afford.
Okay, and the last committee I have on here is existing policies. And I think that was one, I know, actually thinking about it, Carrie definitely was looking at existing policies. That involves going through the comp plan and other stuff. So right now I have for cost, Tony, and I'm just putting you one name, and then I hope more people will add on, and then choose hopefully 2 groups for each person would be the best, because I think I'd like 2 to 3 people, yeah. So I have Tony for cost, Adina for Caltrain, PAUSD, I have Judy, and I'm missing one. Who else? There was someone else who said they would do Carrie. So Barbara. So I have Barbara and Judy. I actually have Carrie down for existing policies. Keith was so gracious to agree for water, Pat for public safety, and Dave for property impacts. Yes.
And I wonder if we want to be accounting for and even how it works with,
Microphone.
sorry, and like how it works with the whole rubric of being objective, because there's a council has a criterion of minimizing visual changes, and there's a broader topic, that's a council criterion, a broader criterion of, visual preferences, and like that's kind of impossible to be objective about, and I'm wondering if that will just happen inherently as people bring forward things and debate who likes what, or
so.
Because it's in the council, the other things in the council are now accounted for, and that one is not, and like, how does this group handle that topic?
So I don't know if we need a visual group, but I can say, having read the comp plan, that there's actually, we actually do have a map, for example, of views that are considered historic views of Palo Alto that shouldn't be altered. And so while it's not like a metric of you can't raise something by X or Y or block certain things, there is a map that sort of identifies those. So we've got some things. I don't know that it's perfect, and we'll have to figure out how to make this as measurable as we can. But the goal would be, there are a lot of conflicts in the comp plan itself. So there's a lot of, we would like to have more east-west connectivity. We also would like to not affect groundwater, but we also would like things to be underground, right? So part of that is we're going to have to take those back to council, say, these are all the policies we found. These are the original criteria you gave us. How are we squaring the circle, and where are we ending up? So that's kind of that would be the existing policies committee then figuring that piece out. So, okay, with this, I'll move so is everyone okay moving the work plan as it is the general guideline? Yes, okay, so all in favor? Aye. Aye. Any nays? Any abstentions? Great. Yes. With the changes that Judy made the changes, yeah. I don't think anyone else had word changes. And again, I would just say that this is just a plan, and it's not meant to be, no one's going to come back and say, on page 7 you said this. We all understand, and we're all voting on this. Is just
Right, but it was with the tweaks to the
committees
as
yes, were denoted, yeah. And Judy's first one's about the words. Does that work? It says draft, yes. And again, in the spirit of like we're trying to, I know this meeting is running so long, but I wanted, it's our first time to really get to talk, and I thought it was important that we do that in a sort of structured way, but, yes. I believe it does not, since it's already wrong, right? The work plan would not, yeah. Just a discussion, yeah. Yes, thank you. No, I appreciate that. Yes. Number 7, yes. So, sorry, we have community conversations left. We also, we did not agree to what to do in terms of how to vet new ideas. So what I'm going to propose is I will talk to Ed and staff and see kind of what some potential alternatives would be in terms of whether it would be a design workshop or a check-in with consultants to vet technical things or what have you, and then agendize this for our next meeting to be able to have hopefully something solid on that. And then I would also like to agendize having hopefully a generic rubric for how we present questions and the framework, to Judy's point, so that we try to have an idea of how that should be for the groups, for the working groups.
With a mild modification, that it
Sure.
sounded like there was general agreement, so we haven't gotten all the way through what to do with new ideas, but I think there was agreement to do a pre-screen, one, to verify whether this has been reviewed before, and if so, where, and what was the disposition, and second, to have an engineering pre-screen on, is this thing physically possible?
Right, so
And then what else we do is TBD, but at least we're gonna be doing that pre-screen.
Right, so what I intended was, I will talk to Ed and the staff about figuring out exactly how that could be officially done, so we have something for the next time. Yeah.
And how and in what manner are the public included in these study groups?
So, what I would propose is, because they're unofficial and they're just gathering questions, that we'll try to highlight on the website which person is in which working group. And so members of the public who are interested, for example, in working on policies or Caltrain could then contact that group and try to talk with them that way. They could even hopefully join the meetings. I think the more, this is all about reaching into our community, and I see this as a real way where we can kind of get the folks that are concerned about certain items.
So, to control it and not have each of us being the bad guy and not inviting 100 people to each study group, it might be preferable to ask each group to or to suggest to each other some expert in that area. And then if the public wants to submit some questions, that would be one thing. But if you have to schedule a meeting that included all the public people that want to be involved in raising questions, I think that's unworkable. That's my opinion. So.
Yep. I think the
we
public
could
always
include
has
the
the
people we-
opportunity to send in comments based on the ad hoc groups that we've discussed. So the idea would be that, yeah, so, but I think what I'm asking, or what I'm suggesting, is that anyone who's interested in any of these ad hoc groups could certainly reach out to those members and see if there's, especially if they have expertise, that I want them to be able to try to participate. But anybody can always send a question to the XCAP with the subject heading of working group of, what have you, and kind of throw in questions that way and make recommendations. I'm trying to make it as flexible for everybody, but still get us something. Yes, okay, lower, we'll go lower. Okay, so we'll table then that part for next time. And then, so moving on to number 7, so community conversations. So this is, and we'll try to wrap this up because that way we can make it to just 3 hours instead of 2, so I apologize. But this is the part, Judy, where we kind of give updates on any conversations that we've had within the community, and try to reflect back what we've been hearing. So is there anybody, I certainly have some community updates, but I want to give others a chance to go first. In Young, did you want to talk?
So, I think Southgate people, I said, Viaduct is coming back, what do you think of it? And I said, I thought that was a kill 2 years ago, why is it coming back, right? So then I'm not sure, like I said, it's coming back, and then that's one question. So there is a new alternative for Southgate, so do I tell them to look at this, or, it's really like, what point do we make this effective, right? So I think when is the point that I communicate something is real that you should concerned about? So, that's my question. And I think people also say, should we do another petition or should we not? We've already done like 400 petition before. Why we, because, that was 2 years ago. There's new members. They don't remember. And then they snuck it in the Viaduct, It's really confusing. So I think that's something I like to report to you. And when we actually make certain decisions, we make to public, right? So it's more effective, and then have a community included. And also another comment I have, the packet we received, I would like to review before the date. So if it's possible, if they make a modification, we gave a feedback, I would like to review and give a comments again, one more draft. Before community meeting, right? Yeah, next week, right? Because I asked the dimension about the Viaduct about like 6 months ago, or I don't know, first time they have this thing and hasn't done it, and I'm afraid that they're not going to do it. And also another thing is that we asked numerous times, what's the view from our backyard? And they said, we're going to do that because we did it in South Palo Alto, but I haven't seen it, and I'm not sure if they're going to include it, things like that. So I would like to see,
okay. So it's there, okay, I missed that, but.
It's not pretty, but it's
Yeah, so, things like that. I just want to help them because I think if I have an eye, I think it will help them to drive that meeting more successful. So if you get the draft, not draft, but the final draft, and then if I have a chance to comment on it, I think it'll be great.
I'll let you know. I have to check with AECom to see when we'll get the updated. My guess is it's close to the meeting, but if I get it sooner, I will,
Yeah.
of course, let you guys know. And I'm certain they won't be able to make any renderings between now and next week. So if it doesn't exist, full disclosure, it will not exist by Thursday.
Maybe not the
So-
rendering, but there's mistakes or, some more additional
Understood.
information.
Just wanted to do some
It will
expectation
be more
setting.
reasonable.
Anybody else have any community conversations that they had? Adina, yeah.
Yeah, so with Friends of Caltrain Hat, I've been participating in a lot of discussions about a potential regional ballot measure for transportation. And there is a closely held business consortium called Faster Bay Area that's been working on ideas for a measure. And there is also a community, environmental, sustainability, social equity group called Voices for Public Transportation that's been working on this. Things are happening so fast that those groups are talking to each other, but it's not like one big set of people at one table. It's different people that are kind of talking to each other, which is, and there have been a variety of, so this is something that is being contemplated. There are some significant questions about whether the very fast deadline for 2020 is possible to make, or whether it will take a longer time to put together a large regional measure. But that is something that those of us that are interested in things that will cost money will be of interest to pay attention to. And another related thing to that is the Metropolitan Transportation Commission is working on its Plan Bay Area 2050, where they are evaluating different potential projects for what would go into what is approved for regional funding and what the region approves from state and federal funding. And so these are all things that are happening that will affect the level of train service and the amount of funding that is outside of this community for great separations.
Dina, did you also want to give out the date for the Caltrain board?
Oh, yes. So to the, like one item that is relevant here is, are we going to have a regional authority in charge of grade separations and potentially other very large projects? And that is one of the topics of a Caltrain board retreat meeting on organization and governance issues on November 21st, starting in the morning in Half Moon Bay, which the location has, they hadn't yet picked the exact venue as of last week Thursday night, but that is something, that discussion that will be happening and people here will be of interest.
It's from 9 to 1.
Just define a region, what did you say? What were those words? Regional what?
So the concept here is that in the Bay Area, we spend a gazillion dollars and mess up on very big consulting projects because we have many different agencies that try one big project each and do it badly. And so there's an idea that's floating around to have a regional project delivery authority for mega projects in general, extremely large construction projects, or maybe something specifically for grade separations. And
there's actually two concepts. So in the organizational assessment report, so Caltrain has a Caltrain 2040 website, and on there there's a document called Organizational Assessment. Page 89 has, I've spent a little time there, has two major concepts. So there's one that's the construction authority that Adina is referring to. That actually requires legislation, but it's been used before. It was used for the LA Metro, the Purple Line in the LA Metro region area. And then the second concept is something called a grade separation district. That actually, the law exists already in the Streets and Highway Code. What that happens though is it only happens at a county level, and it would require one or two cities to going to ask the Board of Supervisors that they wanted to become a special district. So those are, besides the argument of the higher governance of Caltrain, a proposed parallel process is having either a construction authority that would require some legislation or doing a grade separation district by each county. And of course, there's 3 counties, so you'd probably want to coordinate them. So, but that was sort of at a high level. So it's page 89 for those who really want to dig into the
And
weeds.
I would be happy, and Nadia, who remembers page numbers, which I do not, would be happy to talk more about this offline because it's not an agendized topic. But those are some
Great.
things.
So I have a quick update on the rest of community conversations, and I'll adjourn if we have questions afterwards. Okay, all right, go ahead, Tony, I'll let you go.
So my outreach was just 2 people's suspicion that the city is excluding the business community.
Ouch. So I met with several folks over the weekend. One was certainly the Southgate group, and In Young was there. So just echoing the things that In Young talked about, a lot of concerns about adding back alternatives, why were alternatives removed in the first place. So it's important that we sort of address those things. The second is I did get a lot of emails from folks in sort of the Professorville area about Embarcadero. So there's a lot of concern. They feel like they actually took the time to, the Kellermans and Megan took the time to make their own flyers and go door to door to try to get folks interested. So when I say the community's engaged, like really they're going above and beyond here. But echoing some of the things that Barbara Hazlitt was talking about as well, I think understanding what mitigation means in terms of traffic, like does that really mean it's going to fully mitigate something, or does that mean we're going from an F to an E, and is that really worth it? So however much we can articulate those things would be helpful, because that's still an ongoing concern. Yeah, Chantal?
There are a couple flyers here for the November 7th meeting if you want to take those with you, and I will email an electronic flyer, so we'd love it if you can share that amongst your networks, please. Thank you.
Right. And I think did you have anything else, Judy? Sure, okay. I will adjourn, and then Judy, your question.